Sue, are you able to answer a quick question?
What was that?
I was wondering if Sue was on, but
Yes.
with the budget hearing, are we still roll call vote in at the beginning, or? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. You have to roll call to start the meeting.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Are we waiting on Laurie? I don't know that I see her here yet.
It's coming in now.
Great, thank you.
Marissa, do you have host capabilities over there or no?
I don't believe I do. Maybe.
Okay.
How do I?
And whoever
There you
is the host, can we do screen share?
Yep. Marissa,
Thank
you should
you.
have co-host now.
Okay, thank you. And Laurie, you're here. Okay, wonderful. So I think we have everyone at this point. Excellent. So we'll get started at 6:01. Welcome to the March 23rd meeting of the Easthampton School Committee and the proposed FY 2022 school budget public hearing. My name is Marissa Crary, and as secretary, I'm subbing in for our stalwart chairwoman, Cindy Kwasinski, who is unable to join us this evening due to medical reasons. So she sends her regrets to the community, and as a committee, we certainly wish her all the best for a swift return to health. And I will apologize in advance for any ways that I inevitably blunder through Robert's Rules of Order here. But I believe we'll start with a roll call vote. Mayor?
Mayor LaChapelle here.
Maren?
Maren Goldstein here.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt here.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham here.
Laurie?
Laurie Garcia here.
And Marissa Crary here. So we will begin this evening with the budget hearing, and then we will move to our regular session with public speak. So I will turn it over to the budget at this point.
I'm sorry, did you say who you were turning over to, Marissa?
I believe the agenda has us doing the budget hearing first before the
Yes.
regular session.
Yes. All right, so I'll jump in here, okay? So good evening, everyone. I will begin this evening's presentation on the FY22 school district budget. And we have with us tonight also Dale Doron, our business manager, who will discuss some of the actual dollar amount figures. And we also have Maren Goldstein, who is the head of our finance subcommittee, who will also say a few words about the budget as well. So if I have sharing screen abilities, I think I do. Can everyone see that? Is that okay? Okay. So this evening, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of our work at the district level on the budget and kind of the focal points that we use to help us build the budget and how they have been impacted during this difficult year. So first of all, I just want to remind everyone of our vision. In partnership with our community, the Easthampton Public Schools are committed to providing exceptional learning experiences that foster academic, emotional, and social growth within a state-of-the-art, welcoming, and inclusive setting. We will develop lifelong learners with knowledge and skills as independent problem solvers and critical thinkers. So our core values. Our core values are to demonstrate kindness, respect, and support towards each other, to work to create a community that is nurturing, inclusive, and equitable for all, to engage as learners who persevere no matter what challenges arise, and to assume environmental stewardship. So this year, as we began the school year, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and that absolutely impacted our thinking about the budget, and we had to shuffle some pieces around, and we had to look to other sources of funding, which I'll get into in a moment. So some of the areas we had to shift our thinking around, including shift our thinking around the lessons that we were teaching. Teachers spent, just to remind everyone, teachers spent 10 days at the beginning of the school year with professional development to have a better understanding of how to conduct remote learning effectively and to really redefine success and progress, because this was a whole new world for us and for the educators that work in our district. So that really shifted our thinking. We also had to have our students with different needs. We had to adjust the way we were thinking about meeting their needs. Again, in a remote setting, that looked different for many of our students than it did the previous year. And we also had to examine how we measure growth and adjust our expectations of students. We know that remote learning has been a challenge for many of our students. So how do we measure success? How do we measure growth? That's an ongoing discussion. So the pandemic has really shifted our thinking this year and caused us to have some moments of deep reflection. Now I want to just take a minute, and I know this is not part of the actual budget that Dale and Maren will be presenting, but after the budget, the FY21 budget was approved last spring by this committee and ultimately by the City Council, we received federal funding for dealing with the pandemic. So the original grant we received was called the CARES grant, and then this year we also received something called ESSER 1. And I wanted to just take a moment and let everyone know how we have been using those funds, because they did not appear in last year's budget, so they were additional funding. And I'll also talk about what's to come. So this year we have added some staff that is totally paid through federal dollars. We have a technology integration specialist that works really, she was instrumental with our educators at the beginning of the school year. She also has helped families. She's done forums or workshops for families. She's been an essential part of our success for remote learning, particularly with our youngest students. And we have hired 2 English learner paraeducators, one at the K-4 level, one at the 5-12 level, that have helped to support our EL learners because this is a particularly challenging time when we're in remote learning. We've talked many times, and I know this is very small print, about all of the technology assets we have had to purchase over this school year, including Chromebooks, laptops, mice, headsets, keyboards, document cameras, hotspots. We've paid for some internet access for families. So these are all technology investments we've made in the district. Curriculum and materials. I'm not sure we've really emphasized this year the amount of curriculum materials we had to purchase when we moved to a remote model. Curriculum resources at every level. Just think about manipulatives used at the elementary level that were once shared by students. Now each student needed their own set. The same thing with books and other materials. So we've had to make huge investments in curriculum and materials. That's come out of federal funds. And of course, the facilities, signage, air quality has been a big one. All of those things that go with facilities. So I thought it was important for people to know that we have invested the money that has come. We've primarily used the money that came over the summer and into the early fall. Now we have received additional funds in the form of ESSER 2, which was allocated in January or February. We haven't touched those dollars yet. We're applying those dollars towards next year with the understanding that we knew we were going to be facing some challenges next year around funding. So we wanted to kind of set this money aside really for next year when we returned back to our buildings, knowing that we would have to make some significant investments, probably in mental health, in supporting all of our students. So those are some things that we've set aside money for in the fall. And we have received word that there is an ESSER 3 funding allocation that will be coming as well, although we don't know the amount of that yet. The ESSER 2 funding, if you're curious, is $700,000, and we have not utilized any of that money yet. We anticipate that we may use some of it in the summer and then into next year. We also, just continuing on, we've paid a lot of stipends this year to educators for additional hours, for professional development, for a lot of programs or resources that we've attached to some of our staff. So this is a list of the stipends that we've paid, and that's all I wanted to share. So let me get out of my share. And right now, to get into the actual budget document, I will turn that over to Dale and then Maren, and we'll be open for questions. So thank you, Dale. Welcome.
Good night. Good night. Good evening, everybody. It feels like it should be good night. My job in tonight's presentation is to walk you a bit through the nuts and bolts of the actual budget. And what I would ask you to do is to turn to the summary page of your budget document. I'm going to start there, and that's about 2/3 of the way through the packet. So what you see there, you probably remember from budget seasons past that the way that we both develop the budget and manage it is to identify 6 budget locations, which are the 4 schools: Senator Pepin School, Maple, Whitebrook, and Easthampton High School. And then there's a location that is called System. And those are the majority of the fixed expenses and any expense that crosses across the whole district. For example, transportation. And then there is a location that's called Special Education. And those are all of the special education costs that are not unique to a single building. Special education teachers and paraprofessionals who are assigned to a single building are budgeted within the school locations, and those that are cut across the district are budgeted in the special education budget. So this year you will see that most of the budgets are being reduced as compared to the fiscal year 20 budget. There are a couple that are up very minimally, and those are the Maple School budget and the Whitebrook budget.
Dale, could I interrupt you? Would it be useful if someone shared the summary so that way people watching could see the numbers while you're talking?
Certainly, that would be. Let me, there we go. Thank you, Maren. My problem was I'm on an iPad and wasn't able to do that. So each of the location budgets goes down, a certain amount, special ed having the biggest reduction. And then the two that go up very, very minimally are Maple and Whitebrook. And that's consistent with the 2.5% reduction directive that came to all city departments from the mayor's office at the beginning of the budget season. So what I would say as an overview is that the proposed operating budget is a level staffing budget, and that's very consistent with projected enrollment. We're projecting an enrollment of one more student in fiscal year 21 as compared to fiscal year 20. So again, level staffing budget, there's no additional staffing budgeted for next year as compared to this year. And there is no reduction in staffing positions in fiscal year 21 as compared to fiscal year 20. And then the other thing that I would say about it is the staffing line increases accommodate all anticipated step or column moves by staff. And when I say step or column moves, the teachers' salary schedules, they go up steps for additional at different points for longevity in the district and educational attainment. And likewise, they can move over columns for educational attainment. So we've taken a look at anybody who would move because of those things for next year, and we've built them into the fiscal year 21 budget. And then any other increases to a budget line in each budget location were accomplished by reducing lines within that location for the additional funding needed. So if a principal, for example, thought that they might need another $1,000 for general supplies next year, they looked at places within their budget that they could reduce to come up with the $1,000 to move for that purpose. So the effect of any additions to any line other than staffing was a zero net change on the overall location budget. So you might question, and it's a good question, how we were able to cut 2.5% of funding overall when we didn't reduce staffing, because as you all know, the school district budget is very staffing intensive, and to come up with any kinds of reductions, typically what you see is staffing cuts. So the 2.5% reduction was $438,042. And then in addition to that, $40,548 needed to be found to meet the contractual salary obligation changes that I talked about a little while ago. So the overall reduction of the fiscal year 20 budget in order to meet the 2.5% reduction is just under $480,000. And what we did to be able to cut those lines is we are shifting to either the Choice Reserve Fund or the Pandemic Relief Federal Grant Fund for a little under $480,000 worth of expenditures. So rather than them hit the operating budget, they will hit the Choice Reserve Fund, and a small amount of them will hit the federal relief grant funds, because the expenditures, one of the ones that would be shifted to grant funding is the summer programming, because the grant funds specifically allow summer programs to help kids catch up after the pandemic. So typically I'd take you page by page by page by every location, but there aren't those kinds of changes this year. And I'm happy to answer any questions at this juncture, but I wouldn't walk you through every page of the budget, because the comments that I've made cover the changes in the location lines. Are there any questions? If not, I'm gonna turn it over to Maren, who will offer some insights from the chair's perspective.
Shannon?
Looks like Shannon might have had a question.
So, I mean, the first thing that stands out to me is the diversity section and the reduction there. Why is that happening?
Up until this, up until the fiscal year 22 year, there was an obligation to do a discipline audit every year for a good number of years. And that cost $10,000. And next year, there is no obligation to do that audit. So we removed $10,000 from the line. Because
So we're not losing.
That task doesn't need to be done. So that's one answer to the diversity lines. The other is we've had a change in personnel relative to the person coordinating the diversity program, and there was a salary difference between the two people. But
I would also add to that, Dale, is that.
Well, I have one more thing to say, if you don't mind. And the third thing is that that the operating budget doesn't represent all of the spending on diversity activities in the school district. Some of them have always come from grant funding. So there is grant funding that also supplements what's in the operating budget to accomplish all of the diversity work. And that might have been what you were going to say, Maren. And if I jumped on your line, I'm sorry.
So we're not losing any of the programming that we currently have in place.
No programming and no staffing. As a matter of fact, in this current year, the diversity coordinator position went to full-time for the first time, and it's maintained at full-time next year.
By grants, right?
A combination of operational budget and grants. So some to the
Okay.
operating budget and some to grants. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I'm not sure if there's other, I know you didn't want to walk through a lot of the slides, but I don't know if there's any of these other charts or anything that you want to speak to.
I have a couple questions, perhaps. I guess I just would like to just clarify that I'm understanding that while we've faced a 2.5% cut, we're able to manage that without losing any of our services or staffing at this point, primarily because we have the unusual opportunity to dip into these federal grant monies this year. But should we anticipate that a similar cut next year we wouldn't be able to manage it with a level services level staffing as we have this year? So I guess that's my first question. And then my second question, I imagine that there are people probably wondering why we are particularly reducing the amount of spending in special education. If perhaps you could explain. I know that that's a number that really varies from year to year depending on who happens to be enrolled in our district, but I think some more detail on that point might be helpful.
Okay, so thank you for both those questions. They're both really good questions. I'll address the special ed one first. We're actually not reducing what we're spending on special education at all next year. What we're doing is moving some of the expenditures that were more typically or were this year in the operating budget to either the choice reserve fund or grant funding. So the matter, we're not spending any less money. We're just shifting where the money is coming from, if that makes sense. And then relative to your question about what happens next year, I guess there's a couple of things that I would say about that is we've been building the reserve for a good number of years because 6 years ago, there was no reserve, and that's a really bad place for a school district to be in. So we've been very thoughtfully building it because you want to have some reserve to fall back on if there's a rainy day. And if we've ever had a rainy day or year, I would say, this was it. And next year's budget situation puts it squarely in that category. So we will use, we'll pretty much deplete our reserve with what we need to offset the budget next year. But we were very careful to reduce lines in the operating budget that we will not have to replenish those funds in the following year. And the reason that we won't is we did it in lines where we are fully expecting operational savings as a result of moving into the new building, because the next budget that we build is the fiscal year 23 budget. And that budget is expected to have some staffing savings and quite a sizable amount of operational savings as a result of running one building rather than 4, and a state-of-the-art building that runs efficiently rather than the old buildings. So we very, very thoughtfully, the budget subcommittee very, very thoughtfully picked and chose which lines we're shifting to other funding, knowing that we don't have to build it back into the operational budget in fiscal year 23, because we wouldn't want to be able to accomplish a 2.5% reduction this year and then in fiscal year 23 ask for a 10 or 12% increase. So I think the plan is solid in that regard.
And if I may weigh in on that, because that's a really important point. And one of the things that we discussed in our subcommittee meetings was, as a result, some of those savings are now being reflected in our budget now. And I think it's important for us to note that, you know, as we look ahead and we expect to see savings, in some ways we aren't going to the same extent because we're already reflecting them here. If that sounds right to you, Dale.
Yes. Yeah. But I think the thing that's important for people to remember is when we were doing the public information campaign for the building, and a lot of the people who might be watching would remember this, we talked about those operational savings once the building opened. And it's important that people remember that we're actually capturing some of them in the fiscal year 22 budget. So it might not be as dramatic a look in fiscal year 23 as was expected, because we're capturing some of them in the fiscal year 22 budget. And that's important for people to keep in mind.
I have a question around technology. Because of, I know that we as a district were really behind on that one-on-one, you know, device for our students, and even the high school's equipment was already aging. Was there any gain on those percents of getting devices to students and to teachers? Unfortunately, because of the remote learning, that will not be expenditures in coming years or immediately coming years.
Yeah, that's if you actually take a look at the lines that relate to hardware,
Yeah,
we've zeroed out the ones that are part of the building project and
Okay.
reduced other lines accordingly.
okay. I was wondering. Thank you very much, Dale.
I
You're
think what I
welcome.
would add to that, though, that's a really important piece on our technology is that the challenge with a lot of this technology is the life cycle, right? So we did just make a big jump forward. We were sort of hitting that moment where general cycles is about 5 years for computers and such. And so we were hitting that cycle for the high school. and suddenly trying to push forward with all these new technologies that brought in. So what we're going to be looking out is we're going to have to be very careful with our budgeting going forward on technology, not next year or the year after, because we have a lot of those funds coming in through the new building. But right after that, we're going to be looking at another cycle of moving out of losing technology. And so we have to make sure that we don't hit a year where suddenly, because we bought a whole bunch this year, we're going to have to be replacing a whole bunch in 4 years from now, that would then have a significant hit to our budget. So that's just, we're going to have to be really careful to pay attention to that life cycling of computerware and timing on that.
Yeah, you might look at adjusting the replacement years of certain things in order to spread it out, and maybe replace some things a little sooner than typically you would once you get through the first 5-year cycle. But that will have to be planned very carefully.
Yep. So one of the other pieces, Dale, that I thought might be helpful, if we can still see my slide, is just, I thought it might be good to go back. One of the other pieces that we talked about, can everybody see this now chart? Nice colorful chart, sort of.
Can you make it a little bigger? Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about this, Maren? Or
yeah, I think so. I mean, this is part of the choice reserves, is part of how we're being able to make next year work with this size of a loss, and also how it fits with last fiscal year and some of the savings we were able to have for our choice funding based on the use of federal grants to deal with some of our costs. So maybe if you would like to just speak a little bit about choice for last year and this year going into next year.
So what I would say is, over the past 5 years, part of the way that we've tried to control budget growth in the last 5 years is to build a reserve so that you can rely on it to offset some of the operating budget every year. And if you look in the first column there, you'll see over the last 5 years how much money we've applied of the reserve every year to reduce the operating budget ask. And then the next column shows you circuit breaker, which is a reimbursement program through the state that reimburses the district for special ed costs that are above what the state determines to sort of be the average acceptable cost. Every year we get a certain amount of money that reimburse us for special ed costs that are in excess of what their average is. And that money every year is applied against the operating budget to reduce the operating budget. And what we do is we pay for some of the out of district tuitions from it. We have a number of revolving accounts that are related to fees that students are charged. One is the transportation fee, another is athletic fees. And we apply a certain amount of them every year against the operating budget to reduce the operating budget ask. And you'll see what it was over the last 5 years. I think it's noteworthy that next year we're saying we're not going to use any of them. And that's because we've collected no fees this year. And we did that deliberately, given the state of the economy and state of household budgets during the pandemic. We collected no fees this year for anything. Because we want to reinstate them and collect them a year again before we use them again, sort of rebuild the bank, if you will. And then the very last column talks about the federal and state grants that are ones that repeat year to year. And we also use them to offset the operating budget. In effect, they reduce the operating budget every year. And I would say that the federal and state grant column for the fiscal year 22 budget doesn't include any of the pandemic relief money. And that's because it was all awarded in fiscal year 20 and 21. So it doesn't include that. People might wonder about that. Those are grants like the title grants, Title I, Title II, 3, 4, and 5, and the IDEA 94-142 special ed grant primarily. And those are ones that we get every year. They're entitlement grants. They're not competitive. In addition to all of this grant money, we also take every opportunity to pursue competitive grants, but they're not represented in this column.
And just to clarify that too, so in the far column there where we're seeing grants, the FY21 is budgeted at just over 800,000, but that's not actuals. And so that's where you don't see the federal grants that would actually increase that line significantly if it was to show actual. Is that correct?
Correct. These are the ones that we know about at the time we put the budget together, and other opportunities come down the road.
Right.
And one of those extra opportunities in fiscal 20 and 21 was the federal relief money that we did not know about at the time we were putting the budget together.
Yep. So it's not shown.
Right.
Is there any other questions on the budget from anybody?
If you go to the colorful pie chart, Maren, that's well, I guess we have more than one color.
You have several.
Colorful. The brighter one. That one, yes. Thank you very much. This actually shows of the offsets to the operating budget by category, and that would be grant, circuit breaker, and the school choice reserve money, where we actually intend to spend the funding that you saw in the previous chart by category next year.
I have another question, sorry. Dale, I'm curious, you keep saying school choice reserve.
Yes.
Why are we calling it a reserve?
Because it's a revolving, most operating budget funds are for a year, and you spend them in a year, or they're returned to the city's general fund. School choice is the way that it's set up by laws. It's a revolving fund, so it can accumulate from year to year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Dale, just to follow up though, it's not a revolving, the school choice are students coming into our district, but that fund isn't used to pay anything we've been assessed that we have to pay out.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It's the money that we get for students who choose to choice into the district.
And am I understanding these numbers correctly that we're still spending more on students who choice out than we are reclaiming and choice in? Am I reading that data correctly?
That's correct. We have more students choicing out than choicing in. Although we do have a lot more choicing in the last 5 or 6 years than there had been previously.
Mm-hmm.
It's been steadily increasing, but there are still more that choice out. And what our hope is that we will see some of those students return to our schools when the new building opens, as they did at the high school when the high school opened.
It does look like we had steady increase and then a dip this year, which I'm sure is just accountable to pandemic remote learning contexts.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I would, Marissa, if I could weigh in on that. We made a decision earlier in the year because of the pandemic that we were not going to take in any new school choice students from other communities for safety reasons. So that's why, and coincidentally what happened is we lost probably the largest number of students in our history to homeschooling and charter schools and Catholic schools, all kinds of things this year as well. So we, so it kind of went both ways, but we hope to rectify that on both sides in the coming year or two.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions from the committee members?
I guess maybe I would just, since we're discussing choice students, I would maybe ask Dale to speak for a moment on the potential ramifications for the next year, because another reason why it's, to my knowledge anyways, another reason why we call it a choice reserves fund is because we're essentially spending the previous year's money, and then we are at the end of the year given money for that year, if that makes sense. So we're kind of
Correct.
like spending the money a year
Correct.
behind. So we don't actually see yet the ramifications of this drop in students until we receive the new payout. And I wonder if you could just kind of speak to that, Dale.
To quantify how much we would lose?
I mean, I'm not looking for a specific number, but just to say, as we talk about how much of our reserves we're using this year,
Yeah.
the position that then puts us in next year, knowing that we're apt to get potentially less money, and kind of, how
Sure,
we are kind
sure.
of going above and beyond with the reserves here.
Sure. So we will totally deplete what's in the bank if the funding plan that's being described tonight is employed for the fiscal year 22 budget. Because not only did we use the $675,000 that we, plan to and is consistent with about the amount that we use every year in the last 5 years, but we're also making up the 2.5% cut amount of money of $400 and some thousand in addition to that. So when we've been spending it on the order of between like $600,000 and $800,000 a year, we will use significantly more than that for fiscal year 22. But as Jonathan mentioned, we will collect the revenue for the students who are choicing in this year, which will help replenish it. It certainly won't restore it to the level of funding that we have in it currently, but it will restore it. And I think the amount that they are, the preliminary estimate that they put out, the Department of Education put out most recently, is that we will bring in about $850,000 of choice revenue in fiscal year 21. We feel confident that there will be enough, the reserve with what the revenue that comes in this year will be enough to at least match what we contribute on an annual basis in the vicinity of $750, so that we're not creating a funding hole for fiscal year 23. Is that what you were thinking, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. I just made myself full screen. You can hear me. I unmuted myself. Sorry about that.
I think the important piece that goes along with that statement, though, is that we certainly, we've made some good choices in terms of where to put funding and where to budget things. We've certainly looked not just at this 22 budget, but also at the FY23 budget to sort of put some projections in there to sort of align this budget most with that. But as Jonathan said, sort of all of the hopes in terms of savings that would be coming from the new school is basically being absorbed into this year. So there really won't be likely additional savings coming out of next year's budget for moving into the new schools, out of the old schools into the new one. And we certainly cannot continue or be able to absorb another loss like this going forward into future years, or there will be a different conversation to be had at that point.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I'd say, just sort of as a editorial comment, is I know in the past, if not as part of the hearing, there have been conversations about why the committee hasn't chosen to use more of their reserve in the past. And I would say they were wise not to, because it allowed them to weather what has been a very unusual set of circumstances for the fiscal year 22 budget. Had we not had the reserve to fall back on, there is nothing that could have been done to make up that almost $500,000 worth of cuts that were needed to be made with other than staffing. And in a year where staffing is so critical as a result of academic losses that have occurred as a result of the pandemic, it truly would have been a disaster. So you build that reserve to use in a really, really rainy day, and it was pouring, and we were very lucky to have it to use this year, in my opinion.
I'm grateful for that careful stewardship on behalf of the financial subcommittee. Can I just make sure I'm absolutely understanding what you're saying here, Maren, that the projected savings from the new building allow us to have this operational budget that can function without staffing or services cuts, but in a future year, we won't be able to see any additional staffing or additional services as a result of the savings from our new building. We're just merely able to weather this cut to our budget.
Yeah, we are weathering a decrease of 2.5% budget. And so the only way to do that is beyond the piece that Dale was just also talking about, but also putting a lot of those pieces that we're still paying for next year, but we won't be paying for in FY23, or at least in terms of projections right now. That's how we've moved that off of this year's budget, and we're paying for it with those choice reserves. So if that was to happen again, if this budget continued to be decreased in future years, we will be in much dire straits. There will not be the savings that we thought we would be getting for the FY23 budget are already being reflected here. So we don't have additional savings coming in 23 that we could weather an additional reduction in our budget.
I'm sorry, I found another question.
Don't apologize, Shannon.
Okay, so I'm just going through the FY21 budget, and we're well past the halfway point, I believe. I could be wrong. And we have spent substantially less than half of our current budget. Now, is that rolling into next year as well?
Well, the amount of money that's spent, we are spending less than we anticipated at this point in the year, but we always spend more in the second half of the year anyway, because transportation doesn't start to bill until very late in the fall, once they get their billing systems up and running. So we always spend more. All of our utility bills, we get the majority of them between January and June, not as many at the beginning of the year. And in regards to teachers, because they're paid through the summer, their pay is very much backloaded to the back half of the year. So those are three explanations for why it looks the way it does. That said, we are not spending money at the clip that we would have expected for the first half of the year as a result of the pandemic. For example, Shannon, substitute teachers, because we were
Right.
remote, we didn't, you know what I mean? So
Right.
we are, part of the plan is that there'll be some operational savings that will help out as well.
So it will roll into next year though.
And that is some of the choice funding that we'll be keeping and have for now to cover these extra costs for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're hoping we might not need to use all the choice that we thought we were going to have to, because we're spending less money this year, to say it simply.
Yeah, and
Okay,
if we
thank
had
you.
spent all of this year's choice money as we had planned, we would not be able to be proposing this budget. That is part of what's allowing us to be able to make this proposal.
So when we're looking at the cost of the new building, I understand as we roll forward, it's got the built-in, some of the built-in savings of the new building. So is the goal to release the school buildings from the school department back to the city in fiscal year 22? So there's no cost of older schools in fiscal year 23?
I'm sure that we'll look at that. Yeah, I mean, we have to figure out the exact timing of all that next summer, basically, of when we're going to be moving everything from the 3 elementaries to the new building. That will be having to happen next summer. So the exact timing on that needs to be worked out. But yeah, we'll be 100% out of those buildings, especially well before we get into the winter or anything like that, and we'll be releasing them back to the city to move forward as a timing that makes sense for everybody involved.
Okay.
I mean, the biggest operational cost one obviously is Whitebrook, and that's going to be demolition. So that there will be not a single penny of Whitebrook going into fiscal 23 because that building will be gone.
Yeah.
And that is a monster of operation costs. And then the 3 elementary schools that will be released back to the city, that will be, we can work out those timings of when that needs to happen, but it'll be, late summer as everything's moved over. There may be some minor electrical costs or things like that just for the summer, but that should be moved back to the city in short order after we've moved everything out.
And so we had a decrease in our health insurance this year. Is that shown through net school spending formula or somewhere in this expenditure budget?
It's not shown in this budget at all. That's carried totally in the city budget.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so unless there's any other questions or comments, I would like to make a motion that we accept the FY22 school budget and proceed with preparing for that then to be provided to the mayor's office and brought to the city council.
I second that.
There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, then we'll take a vote. Mayor LaChapelle?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Maren?
Maren Goldstein, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
And Marissa Carreri, aye. Again, with big thanks to Dale and the Finance Subcommittee for all your hard work on that document.
They're a great group to work with.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Dale.
Welcome.
So at this point, then we move into our regular session and we'll start with announcements. Superintendent Leclerc, do you have announcements for us?
I do. Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know, in case you missed the message last week, we had 2 teachers that were selected for the Pioneer Valley Excellence in Teaching Awards, and I want to recognize them. We had Jill Collins from Center Pepin and Margaret Betts from Maple. So congratulations to both of those outstanding teachers, who both, I should note, had multiple nominations from their peers, both of them. And they were really spotlighted by their peers for the work that they did, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, how they went above and beyond. So they'll be recognized by the Pioneer Valley Excellence in Teaching group. We normally do an in-person dinner in May, but that will be virtual this year, so more details will be coming. I also want to announce that this Thursday night, the elementary schools have a music night, so reach out to your building principals if you need the Zoom link for that. And finally, I want to mention that I will be putting on a parent forum with the elementary principals and the director of special education on Monday night, this coming Monday night at 6 o'clock. We'll be sending the messaging out for that with the Zoom link tomorrow. But that will be for general ed questions and special education questions, and school committee members are invited. It will be 6 o'clock and it will be taped for anyone that can't make it. And those are my announcements. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would add that we have upcoming meetings on April 13th and April 27th. So next we have correspondence. So I will summarize the correspondence that we received as a committee. I think a couple emails might have come in just right before our meeting, which didn't make it into the correspondent packet, but we did indeed receive those. So first, from a group of parents, we received a letter expressing concerns about the weight of the directives of the school committee, specifically in relation to the following items. Pooled testing, requesting that the school committee hold Dr. Leclerc accountable for effective administration of the program. About a recent survey about the return to full-time school, expressing concern that the survey did not provide enough options for families to communicate their concerns. About the waiver application, expressing concern that the application misrepresented the survey data and didn't demonstrate the operational challenges. About the plan for remote students, expressing that students in person and in remote learning should have the same focus from their teachers. About equity, requesting that the school committee assess if the current plans meet the goals for equity for all students related to race, economics, and health. And about special ed equity, expressing concern that IEP services for in-person students will be delivered in the classroom on Zoom with their specialist. This letter was signed by the following people: Aaron Weisgerber McMurray, Alyssa Pratt, Ben Hersey, Christopher Miles, Colleen Nuremberg, Edward Moores, Elizabeth Drosdale Wimet, Elise Langersmith, Emily Bilodeau, Emma Hughes, Evan Zemer, Harmony Rivest, James Bradley, Jared Trottier, Jason Miranda, Jean Libby, Jen Sandler, Jessie Morrissey, Jessica Montagna, Jessica Sachs, Johanna Dudanaki, Juliette Moores, Kara Bashand, Casey Corsello, Lauren Faulkner Duncan, Lisa Bradley, Lisa Pepe, Lynn Wanamaker, Marcia Cormier, Margot Lanoy, Megan Kelly Bagg, Melissa Drysdale Morrissey, Myra Oyedemi, Natalie Gomez, Patricia Slate, Patrick Foley, Peter Sachs, Rebecca Acevedo, Sarah Hunter, Taryn Vedalino, Ted Harvey, Tiffany Reddy, Tracy Durant, Trish Heed, and Vanessa Brackett. We also received correspondence from Megan Ward Harvey, writing only in her role as a parent, to express that her responses to the survey were not considered in the waiver request and concerns about the quality of remote education, and requesting 3 feet of distance between students and 6 feet around educators. From Melissa Zemer, expressing dismay that we did not receive a waiver for full opening and concern about the needs of children who will remain remote and the potential stigmatization of children receiving special services in the classroom. From Lynn Marie Wanamaker, expressing concern that the pooled testing program is not being implemented in good faith and that has been structured with unnecessary barriers, perhaps as an intentional effort to undermine the program. From Evan Zemer expressing that the waiver application did not accurately represent their survey answers and expressing concerns about the administration of IEP services via Zoom in the classroom. From Myra Oyedemi expressing concern about equitable and quality access for remote students, particularly for those with health vulnerabilities or who are not well resourced. From Jean Libby requesting a copy of the waiver that was submitted to the commissioner to see if the waiver addressed her concerns about spacing and lunches. From Carrie Damon urging more creative ways to support full-time in-person schedule at EHS. From Jennifer Jones, parent of an elementary child, expressing concern about the departure of a reading specialist at Center Pepin and sharing frustration that the school committee has not focused on implementing solutions to get students back in the classroom. And from Lisa Hibbert, parent of first grader, expressing concern about the possible change of teacher assignments with the shift to full in-person time. I switched my words, excuse me. So that was our correspondence for this week. And at this point, we will open up to public speak. So anyone who would like to speak, we will ask that you limit your comments to right around 3 minutes. That way we have time to hear from everyone. If you raise your hand or use the gesture, we'll be glad to call on you. If anyone sees somebody before I do, please feel free to let me know I'm missing them.
I see 2 so far with their hands raised and participants.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I finally got it right. Okay.
Even more.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll start with Peter.
Hi, thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great, thanks. All right. I'm reading a letter from a group of folks signed by 58 people, and I'll begin. Dear elected Easthampton School Committee members, and we're gonna, yeah, sorry, okay. We write with gratitude for your hard work on balancing the differing needs of our families with a clear scientific approach centering safety. This has been an enormously challenging year for a district with aging buildings and a diverse population who has not all agreed on the seriousness of the current pandemic. We are not against a full return to full in-person school. We are concerned that the administration's current plans for and actions around a return to full-time school have not followed the instructions that you have given. We wonder what the power of the elected school committee is to intervene when your directives are not carried out as intended, and ask you to take the actions your position empowers you to take. This is particularly urgent with only 2 weeks until full-time in-person schooling starts. While school-based outbreaks are hitting the news around the country, many of them driven by the variant B.1.1.7 first discovered in the UK, and the simultaneous news that as 1 in 4 cases in New York City may have the E484K mutation, also discovered in variants in Brazil and South Africa, showing inability to evade immunity from previous infections and reduce the effectiveness of current vaccines. Epidemiologists are saying the schools based on old data. We need a safe return to school. Those of us signing this letter do not necessarily fully agree on what should be done, nor are we making the same decisions for our children and family. What we agree on is that the directives of the elected school committee should have weight. In the current context, the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has overridden local school district control in significant ways. This makes it even more imperative that our professional school administrators follow the directives of the locally elected school committee in navigating DESE's statewide mandates. We recognize that Dr. Leclerc has been working very hard and that leadership in a pandemic is enormously difficult. However, we question if she is implementing your directives in good faith. This letter addresses concerns with pooled testing, the recent survey, and waiver application, plans for remote students, and equity. Thanks.
Elise? Elise, are you there? I thought I saw a hand from you.
Yes, hi. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read the second part of the letter followed by several other readers. here. So, pooled testing. We know that Dr. Leclerc did not want to apply for the Massachusetts pooled testing program, but both you and the Easthampton Educators Association pushed otherwise. We know a robust pooled testing program with high participation rate is critical to protect our schools from the kind of outbreak being experienced in Swampscott and elsewhere. But to reach a high percentage of participation requires excellent outreach and participation. It's easy to undermine the program with poor communication. This is particularly suspect from a superintendent who initially demonstrated opposition to the program. Multiple parents with professional expertise in the community have volunteered their time and efforts to educate the superintendent and administration and have offered to provide the person power needed to provide clear, consistent, accurate, and encouraging messaging to parents in the district. This offer has not been acted on in meaningful, effective ways, nor has the administration provided that messaging. We are concerned that low participation in the program caused by ineffective implementation will be used as justification to cancel the program due to poor enrollment and/or not continue the program past the first 6 weeks. We request that the school committee hold Dr. Leclerc accountable to effectively administer the pooled surveillance testing. This includes, but is not limited to, demonstrably supporting and promoting the program at all levels, including support staff, engaging creative strategies such as those proposed by parent volunteers with professional expertise in epidemiology and prevention education, changing tactics such as requiring parents filling out the consent form either yes or no, just as the medical form and permission to treat form is required to enroll one's child in school, and pursuing all avenues for continued funding of surveillance testing. We request that the school committee hold Dr. Leclerc accountable to the measurable indicator of increased family participation in pooled surveillance testing. Thank you.
Jean?
Hi, my name's Jean and I will continue. March survey and waiver application. At your last meeting, Dr. Leclerc insisted that the district did not need a waiver for K-4, and you specifically, with detailed reasons, directed her to submit a waiver. You clearly directed her to conduct a survey that would accurately collect, in detail, parent interest and concerns with full-day, full-time in-person learning. Multiple parents reached out and requested that the survey be more detailed than giving only a choice between in-person and remote. A volunteer epidemiologist in the community acted as a conduit between parents and administration to provide open communication and develop accurate survey questions. In particular, we need to know the percentage of families who are in the "it depends" category, including those who would prefer to wait until April 26th for the added protection of fully vaccinated teachers. The factors on which it depends need to be thoroughly addressed in communication that references scientific evidence. However, the survey only gave us two options, in-person or remote. Dr. Leclerc, through communication with Dr. Megan Ward-Harvey, directed those of us, including myself, who would send our students to in-person school under certain circumstances to select in-person and then list our concerns. Parents were incorrectly assured that their answers to the follow-up survey question would be given appropriate weight and thought. Disappointingly, the survey data was misrepresented in Dr. Leclerc's application for a waiver. Dr. Leclerc wrote that 80% of parents wanted to return to full-day, full-time in-person learning without any mention or data analysis of the concerns submitted by parents. Parents in the district are outraged that our answers were used in this way. We request that the school committee require Dr. Leclerc to provide the raw data from the survey to a neutral party to provide the district with a full analysis of that survey data. DESE was clear that waivers would only be approved for districts that demonstrate certain specific criteria, including operational challenges. This was specifically cited by the chair of the school committee as a reason for their request of a waiver. Dr. Leclerc's waiver application did not mention multiple operational hurdles the district must overcome to fully implement full-day, full-time in-person learning. For example, our district has returned to half-day hybrid in-person learning. To safely scale up to meet DESE requirements, the district must first return students to full-day hybrid in-person learning. In particular, this is important for working out the challenges associated with keeping students 6 feet apart during lunch. In addition, the district has just begun pool testing and has not yet needed to employ contact tracing protocols. We are highly concerned regarding the drastic difference in what the school committee directed the superintendent to do and the action taken by the superintendent. We would love to be wrong, but we can think of few better ways to avoid getting a waiver while appearing to try. We request that the school committee review the waiver submitted and evaluate if further action should be taken regarding discipline or appeal. Thank you.
Celia?
Thank you. Continuing the letter, plans for remote students and discrimination. On March 18th, Dr. Leclerc wrote families, quote, teachers are not expected to develop a full set of lessons for in-person students and a full set of lessons for remote students. Remote students may have more asynchronous lessons. Students in full in-person school will be on computers less, so lessons will not be as computer-based, end quote. Follow-up from parents to their children's educators revealed that educators have been directed that in-person learning will be the primary model, and that the expectation from administration is that educators will focus on the students in person, which may mean a shift in instructional strategies for remote learners. Some teachers have told parents that their children, even as young as kindergarten, will be doing significantly more independent work with few check-ins and little support from the teachers. Parents in this district are deeply concerned that this will result in a significant increase in asynchronous assignments and a significant decrease in live support for students who remain remote. This is a clear equity issue that we are concerned about, not just those who have elected to keep their children remote. Thank you.
Myra?
I'll be continuing on with portion 5 of the letter. Parents have reported that these communications from teachers are to encourage them to have their child return to in-person learning if they would like to continue to receive support. Notably, educators seem to be as frustrated by this directive as parents. We are not criticizing educators. We are concerned about the directives that educators have received. Regardless of the mode of learning, students in person and remote learning must have the same focus from their teachers. This directive for educators highlights the message of risk aversion as a personal preference. Some families have elevated risk of severe illness and death. As we've described, epidemiologists and infectious disease experts are warning of a surge of more infectious and perhaps a more severe variant. There are also increasing numbers of long-haul COVID in children, especially with the B.1.1.7 variant. There are children in this district with health conditions, such as my son, that make a COVID-19 infection a serious health risk. Educators have just been given access to the vaccine, with full immunity likely at the end of April. And the general public, most parents, have not yet been given access to the vaccine. Pressuring families to choose between the quality of our children's education and our family's health in the middle of a global pandemic is an appalling ethical choice and denies our children the right to an education. And most concerningly, it is blatant discrimination against families and children at greatest risk, including those with disabilities. DESE is only requiring our district to provide in-person full-time learning. DESE is not requiring the district to pressure families to return or discriminate. Throughout this pandemic, you, our elected school committee, have shown a great deal of care for the different needs of our families. You have listened to the hard to the mental health impacts of foregoing athletics. You have done your best to find ways to address those students' needs. In multiple meetings in August, we heard you acknowledge how some families were more at risk than others and commit to solutions which met all the families' needs. We request that the school committee assess the degree to which Dr. Leclerc's current plan achieves equity in learning for all students and hold her accountable for the outcomes that they do achieve equity. Thank you.
Linda?
Hi, I hope I'm not interrupting the letter reading, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate people giving their opinions and stating how they feel. But at this point, I feel like we're wasting time. We know we didn't get the waiver, so we need to move on. We need to figure out how to get the kids back safely instead of trying to place blame on someone that we didn't get the waiver because of that person. I think I understand there was about 58 of you that signed this letter, and that's great, but there's 1,500 students in Easthampton. So I would say the majority did not sign it and perhaps don't feel the same way. I think that we're wasting valuable time, and we should be focusing on the best and safe way to get the children that want to go back to school, whose parents want them back, figure out a way to do it. I personally will volunteer my time to help with that. I'll go in the classrooms, I'll help set them up, I'll measure distance, I'll do whatever it takes. But I think that's where we need to focus now on. We've been told what we have to do, let's get it done. Thank you.
I see Evan has a hand.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to continue the letter in the 6th section, economic, health, and racial equity. Before the school year began, you directed Dr. Leclerc to increase the amount of parent input into district decision-making with a focus on equity and centering those families most marginalized. As far as we can tell, that has not happened. Not only has that not happened, there's no evidence the district has even gathered the data needed to include equity as a factor in decision-making. As parents, we have seen teachers help us get a child a snack across Zoom. We know there are students who require a teacher to visually monitor them over breaks if they have no supervision. We know the Chromebooks the district provided do not always work. We are dismayed by the community groups and NIA's not enough to report of the number of students who have not consistently been able to access remote education due to the lack of internet access, as hotspots do not have sufficient bandwidth. The district has failed families who were depending on the district supplied Chromebooks and hotspots. We also know not every parent can send their child to school without available after school care, as many jobs have limited flexibility and require employees to be on site until 5. We know economics and health are linked, and that those who have limited economic means are at a higher risk of COVID-19 and a severe outcome if infected. We know that across the country, parents of color have had far less trust in a safe return to school, but do not see local engagement with our BIPOC families. A district with a recent Department of Justice investigation into racial inequity, ignoring the racial equity impacts of the current return to school is shocking. We understand that one challenge is that once one collects data, one can no longer pretend innocence and may need to address the need. Yet the need is clearly there. The failure to gather the data and serve the families is failing the children most impacted by this pandemic. We request the school committee assess if the current plans meet your goals for equity for all students. We request the school committee hold Dr. Leclerc accountable to the equity outcomes, including but not limited to measurable metrics of contact with families not returning to in-person, compiling data and demographics and impact of the pandemic on educational outcomes, contact with families of color, engagement with AKIND on solution, including responsiveness to community feedback on the effectiveness of district supplied Chromebooks and hotspots, and deploying school resources to prioritize the most marginalized students, both this spring and beyond. Thank you.
Jessie Morrissey.
Sorry about that. I'm continuing with section 7, special education equity. We know that you have received letters of concern from Center Pepin parents whose children will no longer be receiving reading support from their longtime reading specialist. We hope that you also know that nearly all IEP services for in-person students will be delivered with the student in the classroom on Zoom with their specialist. Not only can this lead to other students stigmatizing the student receiving services, it is distracting for the class and the student, making it difficult for students to focus on needed services. Many parents have pointed out that the administration has had months to plan for a return to school and that Dr. LeClaire said the schools would be ready. Where are the plans for inclusion for special education services? Where is the furniture with plexiglass barriers for small groups to meet? Where are the tents for IEP services? The lack of planning jeopardizes these students' abilities to receive a quote unquote free appropriate public education and risks that they will receive an unequal education. In conclusion, this return to school plan centers neurotypical children with no learning disabilities whose parents are free to pick them up at 3 o'clock and whose family is not at increased risk of severe outcome related to COVID-19 and or who has been able to access the vaccine before the general public. Leadership in a crisis is fraught with opportunities to erode trust. We are writing to you because of an erosion of trust with the administration of our children's school district. We hope that you hear our plea for transparency, honesty, and accountability. We understand that any supervisory actions you may take may not be public. However, we request that you demonstrate accountability to the community by sharing quantifiable indicators of progress towards these areas of concern, and that you do on a rapid timeline commensurate to the DESE requirement of full in-person school by April 5th. Sincerely, the undersigned parents of the Easthampton Public School District. Thank you.
Ben Hersey. Ben Hersey. Okay, great.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to give a big thank you and sort of round of applause to the teachers in this district who are beyond measure and have gone the extra mile again and again and again. I have my second grader has been blessed with a teacher who has met him at every step of the way, met his different kinds of difficulties through digital issues. And every teacher I speak to, and I try to speak to as many as I can because I'm a teacher and I feel like solidarity with them. The people in this district, the teachers here are, you are beyond measure, and I'm very grateful for the work they're doing. And if ever I or any other parent in this group can be of support to them, please know we're here and we're like really happy and excited to do what we can to make the learning environment as safe and professional and healthy as possible. Thank you for everything you're doing. This year has been rough and we appreciate it.
Scrolling to see if anyone else in the committee sees someone. Please let me know. Lynn, yes.
Hi, I'm Lynn Marie Wanamaker. My daughter is a senior at Easthampton High School. I wanted to underscore the request for accountability and really implore the elected school committee to ensure that the decisions that you are empowered to make by virtue of being elected by the community, when you make a decision, that those decisions are followed through on. And I think that that is really the distillation of the frustration in the letter that you just heard. When I hear you make a decision and then I don't see it followed through on, that erodes trust. And this is a time when we really need to know that the wise decisions that you're making are going to be implemented. This is literally a life and death situation. I also want to remind you that this is not a matter of individual choice, that dismissing a call for responsible collective action to protect our students, staff, and community as simply, if you don't like it, go make a different choice, is unbelievably irresponsible and unethical. This is a situation that is affecting us communally and that needs to be solved communally. And so I would urge you to refocus anytime there's a temptation to see it as a matter of individual choice and think of your responsibility to the entire community, the wise decisions that you've made, and your responsibility to ensure that those decisions get implemented. Thank you for letting me speak.
Juliet?
Hi, it's Ed and Juliet. Hi.
Hi. Thank you. We were just wondering, we haven't really heard anything to the effect of how, basically with the letter stating that they're not really going to be focusing on remote learning anymore. Do we have assurances that if we keep our children home and continue with remote learning, that they won't in any way be penalized and be held back a grade by doing this?
That's our question.
That's pretty much the question, just because it seems like the focus has completely shifted 100%. And, you know, based on the way that that letter was written, I don't really feel all that confident that we're gonna, you know, have a good time remote learning from here on out. So is that, I didn't know if that had been addressed.
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, we aren't allowed to directly respond and during the public speak session, so we won't be able to answer that question, but we will certainly hear it and take it into consideration.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted to clarify. So you didn't think we were ignoring you. Marcy.
Hi, thank you. I'm Marcy Cormier. I have a student in 9th grade, and I'm actually reading a letter on behalf of Casey Corsello, who has 2 students in the district, one at Whitebrook Middle School and one at Pepin School. And she writes, "Dear school committee members, as someone who has served on the school committee, I've been very grateful for your leadership and courage to make hard decisions to keep the greatest number of people in our community safe. I'm amazed at how well you've handled the Herculean task in front of you with questionable state and federal guidance. I feel a bit defensive on your behalf when you are the target of misdirected, understandable frustration from parents in this district. It is true that many of our children are suffering and do need to be back in the schools. No one is arguing that fact. My children have benefited from returning to school, and while it isn't convenient for my family to pick up every day for half days, I trust that this is the best we can do at this moment. I trust that the decision was made based on scientific data as stated above, keeping the greatest number of people in our community safe. I was pleased that you directed Dr. LeClaire to request a waiver to push back full reopening to April 28th. While I want nothing more than my children to be back full time, I know that not all teachers are vaccinated yet. I was surprised to hear that a kindergarten teacher has yet to get her first vaccine because she's having trouble finding one. I want to clarify the intention of the dedicated group of parents in the Easthampton Public School Advocacy Group who have written and signed a letter to you tonight. We are advocating for all of the stakeholders in our school committee, our teachers, staff, administrators, and our children, not just our own children. While I can tell you my 3rd grader is struggling, has anxiety being on Zoom, he's challenged to sit still, remote learning isn't working for him. What I do know is that he will be okay. He will catch up. I share this because I know how other parents are feeling, and I think that most of us can agree that we want our kids back. I know that each of you personally, I know each of you personally, 2 of you are my colleagues. I trust each and every one of you. I've been in alignment with every one of your decisions. I know this is stressful. The intention of this advocacy group is not to add stress to an already awfully stressful situation. It's to advocate for everyone. It is also disheartening to see that we are only one of 6 schools that were denied a waiver out of the 72 that applied. I can't help but wonder if the outcome would have been different if the waiver had been submitted as the committee had decided upon. Thank you again for all of your efforts, and thank you to our teachers, staff, and administrators, and Dr. LeClaire. This is hard, and I know everyone is doing their best. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Am I missing anyone here before I close this session? Okay. Then we will close public speak for the evening and continue on to our next item, the policy subcommittee update.
Okay, we are actually having a meeting next Tuesday at 5:30 to discuss the changes from MASC on the face coverings policy. And we're going to wait for the COVID team to be able to review the changes.
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
Do we have an update from the Finance Subcommittee?
Well, I would just actually ask a question. I know that there was a review on the pool testing. I wonder if actually under policy would be a time to bring that up and talk about that, to step back to policy. I don't know if Lori or Shannon want to speak to that.
Shannon, did you want to speak to that about policy? Or I was going to mention what we talked about in COVID response and mention what we could do as a committee to move forward with trying to pursue mandatory pool testing. So would you like to discuss this now? I'm happy to do that, or I can bring it up when we talk about what we spoke about just yesterday. It's up
To be honest with you, I have no idea what you're talking about, so you might as well talk about it.
Are we ready to go on to COVID response team? Do you want to do that now?
Talk about it right now, given it's a policy that perhaps we would be adding to the agenda for next week.
I apologize. Where is this? I did not get a policy.
I forwarded something to the committee that I saw was passed in Arlington just yesterday. And I asked for legal advice to see if we could pursue it. And we did talk about how pool testing has been very difficult yesterday in our COVID response committee. So I would like to preface this by saying 2 of the main subjects we talked about yesterday in COVID response, we have new details to talk about as a committee. And that's how fast things are changing during this pandemic. So not everything was discussed in the committee, but I think that the committee discussion would be an appropriate segue into the discussion that we need to have this evening. Is that okay with the colleagues on my committee? Yes, I can continue. So let me go in order of what we talked about, okay? And I will get into the pool testing. So we started out by a report from our public health nurse, Amy, who had been happy with the metrics. Unfortunately, that all changed over the weekend when the increase was over 100% in Easthampton. And she shared alarming news with us because she's the one who does the tracing in the district. I'm going to quote from what she said yesterday. She wants to try to remind everyone, do not relax now. We're very much still in this. People are not getting this. They're sending their kids to school when they're symptomatic and waiting for the results of a COVID test. That came from our public health nurse. We then talked about the metrics in general with an epidemiology update, and we talked about how we have to be extremely cautious with the new variant, the B.1.1.7, and there is a possible probable surge coming. We then discussed the issue of quarantine in the district because there had been some discrepancy, and we have to follow the 10-day quarantine policy that is on our website after any close contact. So it's a full 10 days. And that is what we do in this district to be safe. After that, we talked about protocols for in-person learning and what will happen if there are surges with Commissioner Riley's new mandate that everything has to be kept in person. So we talked about, as a COVID response team, that it is very important, as I've stated in the past, to contact our Representative Carey and also our Senator Velas, because this is going to have to come from the legislator. We know that an act has been submitted by Representative Lindsay Sabadosa, but more people have to buy on for the safety of our school populations and the populations of the families that our children are returning to. After that, we then discussed the waiver. And we have already we have heard tonight about the concerns, but those concerns were also discussed yesterday. So we can talk about that later. But I would like to say that people have alluded to the article that just came out that did state that there were 74 requests. This information we did not know yesterday. We had asked Dr. Leclerc to find out, because she told us that she was told that very few requests would be granted. Needless to say, that wasn't the case, because there were 74 requests, 58 have been approved, 6 have been denied, and 10 are still being evaluated. 32 of those requests were not dealing just with middle school. We know that our 5th grade request was approved. That was sent in a week before. But out of the 32 requests that were approved, they were for returns in different increments, what we had wanted here as a committee. After we talked about that, we were talking about distancing. We also went into a lengthy conversation about pool testing. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth assigned us a company for the pooling that isn't doing a very efficient job. They assigned, I believe Dr. Leclerc said, 3 different districts in Western Mass, this same company. One already dropped out because they're just really disorganized. The way they report things to the school district is bad. So I think as a committee, we can talk about also trying to get another lab to represent us. But it was reported that only 37% around that have opted in to pool testing. Since our meeting yesterday, and this is what now I will discuss that I shared for everybody's information, because I just found out about it early this morning, that last night in a school committee meeting in Arlington, Massachusetts, they unanimously approved to have pool testing as mandatory for any student that will be in person. I asked Dr. Leclerc to ask our attorney if that would be possible. He reported no, but as a committee, I would like more legal advice. And I got in touch with the school committee person I know in Arlington, and she said, Dr. Leclerc, that their superintendent would be very willing to share the process with you and how they got that approved for mandatory testing. And it's a very detailed policy that I will bring to policy committee Shannon, so we can talk about adopting it. But it's something that I think we need to have an emergency meeting, because this would need to be adopted before April 5th. And it would have only people that have some type of health issue. The doctor would have to supply evidence why people would not be pool testing. So everyone's in unless they provide documentation why they can't be in. When I heard that our legal counsel here in Easthampton said it wasn't possible, I reached out again right before this meeting and heard back that one of the ways that they were able to vote unanimously in favor of mandatory pool testing is by acknowledging that New York City did the same thing in December. So if New York City can do it, I don't see why we have to follow DESE, who says it's not mandatory, who wants to put people in harm's way with new variants. So does that answer the question about Arlington's new policy that other districts are going to try to take on? Does anyone have any questions about that? No?
No questions, but thank you for all of your diligence in pursuing all of that up to the last minute today.
It is my pleasure to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also just agree. I think that pool testing is really critical in terms of our current review of our community. And so looking at options, both in terms of improving our community engagement and communication, as well as looking at the possibility for a requirement with the option to opt out as opposed to opt in would also be an important thing for us to look at as a committee. And agree, it also would make sense for us to have to hold a emergency meeting to be able to deal with that.
Okay, thank you, Lori. I didn't realize that that's what you were talking about was the email that you sent. I didn't see it as a policy. I saw it more as like a resolution, perhaps, or something
have
to
the
be
whole-
added. Okay.
I'm sorry. I have, I'll just send you the policy. I have it. I'm sorry, Shannon. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. I saw it as something that could be added to our emergency addendum that we had done back in October. I didn't see it as an actual policy. It just looked like a statement. So I apologize. I didn't realize that's what you're talking about. But being that you want it, you have a policy. It needs a first reading, a second reading. I do not see how that can happen before April 5th. So I recommend that we do some kind of a resolution, or like I said, an addendum to, if we did a policy, we wouldn't be able to get it done by April 5th. Because we need two meetings.
Procedurally, does it have to go through both readings before you can start enacting it, or can you start implementing the policy before it's officially on the books? Do you know?
That is a Sue question I do not know the answer to.
And what would
Sue?
It would need to be approved by school committee twice.
Twice, okay.
So it does have to go through both readings. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested to talk with the committee about what it looks like to schedule two very short single item agenda meetings where that's the thing that we're doing for the evening, and perhaps we could have two meetings in 1 week if we know that we're really seeking to accomplish something on a very, fast pace here in interest of the school reopening.
Sue?
It needs to go to the policy subcommittee first, and then it would go to school committee for first reading and then a second reading.
Mm-hmm.
So we're meeting on Tuesday after the COVID response team meets on Monday. It would have to be right after that.
Yeah, so we'd be looking, so if that's the 30th, we'd be looking at like a 31st and a 1st or something like that. If the committee is open to really trying to fast track this, I think that's feasible.
Is there a possibility that, as Lori mentioned, it might be a resolution as opposed to a policy? Or as Shannon mentioned, it could be added to as an addendum to a current policy?
If it was an addendum, it would still have to go through the readings, Maren. The only way that we could do it is a one vote kind of thing as a resolution. And I don't know if that will hold.
Yes, Allison.
And also just logistically, just pointing out that we would need to inform families that we're going to be returning or thinking that they're returning on the 5th. Some of them, I think, as Laurie mentioned, would need to seek a medical excuse. I mean, we need to give people some time, and also to sign up everyone. Remember that our nurses have to put all that information into the vendor that we have, and then sort the pools. We have to sort them by classes and plan the schedule. So it's not something that can immediately happen the day after you finish the policy. There are a few things that we would need to do to make sure everyone was informed, because I would venture to guess parents would not want us doing something invasive with their child, putting something up their nose without their actual knowledge and consent.
Can you remind us of the percentage of people that have accepted and approved pool testing at this point?
We were at 38%, I think is what Laurie said was the figure we knew of yesterday. Now, I think they started it again. Today was the high school and the middle school. I think that they have had more. I know they did 80 students at the high school today, which is a higher number. than we did last week, but we've added all the athletes. The athletes are being tested every week, even if they're on an off remote learning week. So, so the numbers have gone up, but I won't know the actual percentage until they complete the testing tomorrow. They have the elementary schools. I think they have Center Pepin left to do tomorrow.
And because that number is quite low and we're looking to use this as one of our tools to have a healthy school environment, can you also sort of re-clarify what you have done so far to actually engage community, to engage them, to have the opt-in?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we've done messages to families, both myself and the building administrators have put messages out to families. Some of them, I think, did it over the phone, and some of them did it via email. We've put on our website, we had the documents under the COVID section, the frequently asked questions, the consent form, the basically the information forms that were necessary. We pulled the frequently asked questions today because we're revising some questions. I put a message on Facebook last week after, I think we put it on all the Facebook pages about the how to do a nasal swab. It's like a 2 or 3 minute video by a little second grader. So I know that the principals at the elementary level sent that out to families so that they could see it. And then I put it on social media last week, and that was shared out on our web pages, on our social media pages. Those are I know we've talked about it here at school committee. Can't think of anything else that we've done.
What would you propose to add to that to try to increase our numbers then naturally through, as opposed to this opt-in, opt-out policy where everybody's be required? What would you like to be able to do to increase our numbers then?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So we have communicated with, was that question directed at me or was that for Laurie? I'm sorry.
For you.
Okay. We've reached out to other communities via webinars that we've had with other vendors, other communities that are doing it across the state. And they have, across the board, most districts have said participation has started out low and grown every week via word of mouth. As people learn about it and become more comfortable with how it's working, they have been added. That was anecdotally told to me by multiple districts. So I think that that's one way that we're hoping to increase participation by having more people every week join the group and get part of the pool. And I think that we've also looked at putting it out on social media. The administrators will talk more about it in future newsletters. Of course, if the avenue Laurie wants to take happens, then that will change the direction of it. But I think that, you know, we've been getting the message out there. Some of the concern that I've heard from families is around the frequently asked questions document. People have had questions about the answers on that document, and we've been pulling those answers directly from the pooled testing document on the DESE website. So I think there's some difference of opinions about what we should be doing and what way we should be doing it. And we're trying to follow the vendor that we're using and the DESE website. So there's some, you know, differences of thoughts, and it may be different for different vendors. I don't know. This is the vendor we're working with, and so this is how they're advising us. I will say that this vendor is clunky. They're building the tool as we're using it. So that's been a challenge for us compared to, I will say, compared to Frontier Regional was one of the first districts around us to do this, and they have a different vendor, and they said it's been working out well for them. The only other, and I, you know, I have concerns about a comment that was made that I was not interested in doing this. I had a reluctance initially, as did most superintendents across the area. And my reluctance stemmed, and I said this to the committee before, and I'll say it again, the recommendation from our nursing staff to me was that they had a hesitancy about doing this because of the workload that would be put on them, and knowing that they had a lot of responsibility with the COVID isolation rooms. I brought that concern to you on the committee and expressed that to you. Once people started saying, we want this, I said, okay, fine, then we'll do it. So, you know, I think pool testing is fine. I think it's great. It's not invasive really for kids. It's pretty easy to do. The kids are not having any problems with it at all. So I don't have any issues with it. But I do think that, you know, we have challenges around the vendor. As I think Laurie Garcia mentioned, there are 3 districts out in this part of the state that are using this vendor. 1 dropped out this week. There are 2 of us left. Most communities around us are not doing pooled testing. So I would push back a little bit and say we're one of the first communities in Western Mass to do pooled testing. So I think we deserve some kudos for that. But absolutely, there's more we can do to sign up folks. And I think a lot of it is getting information out about what it is. And I'm open to doing that. So.
Laurie.
Because this vendor has been so difficult, is it possible for you, Dr. LeClaire, to contact DESE and tell them that our waiver was denied? And in addition to our waiver being denied, our kids have to go back into full person due to a mandate before enough teachers are properly vaccinated. And we need to have a vendor that can help us deal with this pandemic with new variants. And if we have a vendor that isn't doing a good job, we want the right vendor.
I'm happy to do that. I'm cautious only because I think that after working with this vendor for the past, I think 4 weeks we've been working with this vendor. I think we've worked out a lot of the kinks with them, and we've pushed back on them to get things the way we want them. So I am reluctant to start over with someone new. You know, I think we've got it to a place where it's working, and our nurses are able to do what they need to do. But I will double check with them to see if they still have ongoing concerns about this vendor. And if they do, I'm happy to contact the Department of Ed. Does that sound all right?
Yes, thank you. But I also realized that how stretched our nurses are.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's any type of funding that we could hire someone, even at a very part-time basis, in order to take the stress off of our nurses and be able to manage pool testing, because I want to push towards making it a requirement if we are able to vote on that. Because if you have been reaching out to the district, our Principal Evans did a phenomenal job with a wonderful video. You are all bending over backwards to get people to sign on. But if they hear things like, I don't want, you know, they don't want their child to have a swab stuck up their nose, we can't present it like that because it's just a little roundabout that a 2nd grader was able to demonstrate so beautifully. So, but nothing seems to be working. And we need to make it safe, and it needs to be mandated, because with all these weeks and 37%, as was discussed yesterday, we are talking about an April 5th mandate to bring people back in. We need to have everyone on board. If they don't want to, they can stay home until it's safer.
You know, I think I would add to that, Laurie, that not only is there some misconception, but also just like parents are maxed out. Families are exhausted. And so just the work that it takes to opt into a program, it might seem minor, but it's it's a task, it's an extra chore to have to do. And so I think that, we might be seeing that some families haven't opted in just because it's one more thing to manage. And so, I think if we, as a committee, seem to be projecting a will toward mandatory pooled testing, I know it's a fast timeline, but I think that we should be, make clear that that's what we're expecting to happen as quickly as possible. And so we don't need to wait until we cycle through a policy and 2 full committee meetings to start implementing the structures that need to be in place. But then also, I think it would be worth considering perhaps just like one step down from mandatory, with the only exception being a medical note, to something that's more like an automatic enrollment, and then you have to opt out of the program, and perhaps we can even allow you to opt out of the program with undisclosed reasons, but simply that you do not want your child to participate in it. But I think just if we do the work on the district side of enrolling everyone and then ask families to actively choose to not participate, I think we might see better results in terms of our numbers, without being as draconian as like requiring a medical note to not participate. Yeah. Yes, Dr.
I just want to comment a few things. Number one, to Laurie's point, thank you for mentioning the PowerPoint that the high school principal did. Also, the school newsletters was another one that I forgot to say those two when you asked, or Marissa asked an earlier question, or Maren did, about what we were doing to get the word out. Your second point, Laurie, about nursing, we have an actual posting out right now for either a part-time or a full-time LPN or RN. We're desperately looking for nurses. I think this is the 3rd or 4th wave of a posting that we've had. We've attempted to look for someone full-time, someone part-time. Now we've put out a new posting, either full or part, with using some of those federal dollars that I articulated earlier. We would hire another nurse, and it would be our intent to keep that nurse on next year as well as a floater nurse, just to have an extra body. So that's an ongoing search. And Marissa, to your point, we have been asked to do, and I forget who asked, but we have looked into the assumed consent that you described, and we were told that we cannot do assumed consent. So we have looked into that already. I will look back into it because I can't remember the reason why, but it was something that we did investigate a couple weeks ago.
But what I would speak back to that, and I think actually Marissa spoke very eloquently on the fact that I agree that putting forward a mandatory requirement to join pool testing and requiring a medical note, especially if we're trying to do that in a short timeline, would be very onerous on parents. And so I think that would make sense that we might not want to be that heavy-handed of implementing of a policy, but a policy where people could opt out for personal reason, medical reason, but not requiring any kind of medical note for that, would allow for a much easier way of people being able to opt out of the program, but then still would meet the majority of people being able to be into the program.
Maybe it would be good if there was a possibility for some type of communication, if parents are hesitant, if they have fears about it, to be able to talk to one of the school nurses about it directly. Maybe instead of having a doctor's note, because I can understand the difficulties of that, but I don't know if it's possible to require a phone call just to say that it's really not bad. Have you seen it? Because I think there's just a lot of bad press about this pool testing. And I don't know, that's something we could discuss. But also going back to, I know how hard you've been looking for nurses, as most districts have had trouble getting teachers, nurses during this pandemic. But would it have to be somebody that's a nurse to help with this? Couldn't it be somebody that does more of the administrative work? I would think that would be easier to get somebody to not actually doing the hands-on, you know, picking up the bag from the teacher's room, putting things in a computer, that doesn't need a nurse as far as I'm concerned, but
It
maybe
doesn't.
I'm wrong.
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. We would like to have another nurse in the district, but it's not for the exclusively for the pool testing reason. Our building administrators are assisting with pool testing. Mr. Evans did it, I think, on his own today with the school district nurse. So all of our administrators are getting used to pool testing as well and helping out.
And Dr. Leclerc, I hear what you're saying, that some source said you can't do assumed consent. But again, to just, you know, right now you have to actively opt in. If you do nothing, you're not in it. What about, at the very least, a form that you must complete in order to enroll your student in person? And so you have to at least engage with selecting yes or selecting no.
And I believe it's the DESE frequently asked questions document that said that. So I will look at that and get back to you. But I can definitely have our nurse look into a form and see if there's something that we can do.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece here too, like you've mentioned some different social media posting, you've talked about putting up videos. Principal Evan did his piece. I think, like you were saying too, though, that there's sort of comfort builds over time, and so numbers increase over time. So I think that at bare minimum, we should be sending out communication, email, phone calls, social media every week, trying to increase numbers and participation, even as we as a committee try to work out these details about some sort of mandatory program that just requires a form that every parent has to fill out that form, and it's going to say opt in or opt out. It could be that we're saying that everyone's going to be in it unless you opt out, with, you know, no reason given, to the other end of the extreme of that everyone's going to be opted in unless you get a medical note that takes you out. So, I mean, I think that as we try to work through those pieces about how we want to go forward in the next, you know, week and a half, at least we can start doing every week. We should be engaging the community about reminding them about pool testing and getting people to opt in until we have a definitive program.
And I think, you know, people are tired. It's really exhausting to handle all of this bad news and fear-based decision, you know, not fear-based decision, that's a negative phrase, but like the constant having to confront fear and danger. And so, you know, I'm just thinking also about framing this in the positive ways. When I got an email that my son's school's pool testing came back negative for the week, I had a moment where I was like, oh, yes. And then I realized, like, oh, not that many people have enrolled. It really doesn't mean all that much. But I think that's an opportunity where you could like remind parents, like, the more people who are participating in this, the more we can have these moments of reassurance and safety, not merely avoiding danger, but then it can be a way that you can feel really good about, like, okay, my kid was in school all week and they're fine and they're safe from having been in school.
I completely agree. I got that email too, and it was a really positive email to see in terms of positive news. So
yeah, all pools were negative last week.
Yeah, and so maybe attach to those emails, opt your kid in now, you know, like build on that positive momentum.
Let's all know that, yeah, as many of these kids are safe, not just 38%.
Yeah.
Because word of mouth can spread also, like you're saying. Well, word of mouth, if we engage every single parent that's on this phone, you know, on our Zoom right now, and every parent that reads that email, and every parent that, you know, sees a social media post, keeps pushing and saying, hey, we're only at 38%, we need to get more people signed up, is going to keep to push that momentum forward. And that word of mouth and friends, connections, community can help build this to get us up to a place where, yeah, we're not going to be at 100%, but you know, I see no reason why we shouldn't be at 75% for our students to getting pool tested in this district.
Agree.
So I think for me, one of the takeaways from that letter was also just recognizing that we need to have more momentum, especially as we are headed towards being more in school and in closer proximity It's going to give us that extra assurance, that positive news, like Marissa just mentioned. And so for us to really push every single angle on this seems pretty critical right now, from communication, community engagement, all of those pieces. And that if we do all those things, then maybe we don't have to have some sort of mandatory requirement. But I think we also still need to have, I don't know if we need to have more additional conversation about that as well.
Well, maybe, we can talk with Cindy when she's available about scheduling those emergency meetings with the single item agenda for next week, knowing that we can always cancel them if we don't need them, but we can have them posted and available if we do decide we want to move swiftly with one of these plans.
Policy subcommittee meets Tuesday, I heard, like 5 o'clock. We could potentially do something, our normal Tuesday 6 o'clock kind of thing. I don't know, Thursday 6, I mean, I don't know, but we can.
Yeah, that'd be good. Anything else on this topic or policy subcommittee? We ready to move on? All right, so finance subcommittee, I assume that you don't have anything.
We're covered.
Excellent. CES update, Jonathan.
I'll keep it short. I have a full board meeting with them on the 31st. We have begun our interviews in very preliminary stages for the executive director search. I was pleased to have Dr. Leclerc join me on that committee. So Easthampton will be very well represented in the choice that is the choices that are made. We will be passing on selections to then the full board for final interviews with those candidates.
Thank you. Laurie, I know we heard from you about some of your updates. Did you have any other information from the COVID response team?
We did discuss, as I told you, what would happen with in-person learning if there is an outbreak, and that's when I said you have to contact legislators. But I don't know, as a committee, did we want to talk about trying to resubmit the waiver? I know the deadline has passed, but because things weren't represented as our community stated in the comments section, I don't know when the proper time to discuss that is.
Based on the agenda, I would agree that it'd be now. I mean, I think that it certainly was not, unfortunately, Dr. Leclerc, I do not feel like your paragraph, the last two paragraphs that you talked about, it really did not represent the encouragement that we were looking for. I think it painted a very rosy picture that if I saw this letter, I probably would have denied it as well. And clearly there's been quite a number of waivers that have been approved. And it's disheartening that this was not addressed with, I think, the clarity that as a committee we offered around how strongly we felt we were not going to be ready for the 5th, and that we were asking for a very reasonable extension. I don't know what other people's opinions are or thoughts, but I don't know if we can apply again. Probably can't. I mean, it's passed. We've been denied.
If I could just offer a comment on the waiver. I mean, I'd like us to see the resubmission of the waiver, and I would, as a part of that, talk about a new presentation of data of describes or looks at the data in the feedback that we've gotten from each other and from the COVID task force, as well as parents on this call. They can only say no, right? Time has passed, but it's certainly, I mean, the case is based on numbers and a survey of our community. And if we do move forward with the mandatory pool testing, it gives a couple of weeks for the vendor and nursing staff and admin staff to get ready to do the mandatory pool testing. It gives us a little space to get that done as well. if I'm understanding the timeline right, but so I don't know. I'm kind of a person who says, let's do it. All they can do is say no.
Yeah, if I
it's
can
in-
add a little color to the discussion. So the process that I took was the following. We had a call with the commissioner, superintendents had a call with the commissioner, where the process was explained to us, not by the commissioner, by one of the associate commissioners, Rob Curtin. And there was a PowerPoint, which is readily available on the DESE website that we went through at that time. They informed us that there would be office hours for superintendents, any superintendents to attend, leading up to every day during the waiver application process. So I did attend one of their office hour sessions, and I did speak to them about some of the things that, I was being asked to include, such as the data, that sort of thing. They were articulate about what they wanted to see in the waiver. So they kind of helped me form the dialogue or the presentation of the waiver. The waiver that was submitted ended up being in a narrative letter form. I had initially done it in bullets, which is what some other communities did. So I don't think the format really mattered, but the information that they wanted was very streamlined, very specific. They didn't want a large document. They wanted something very simple. I checked with colleagues who submitted some waivers of no more than half a page. So I asked questions before I put the waiver together, number one. And so the waiver then was put together, and I don't have an issue including more or different things in the waiver, but I had gone through the actual guidance document and really tried to pull out what I thought would be issues that would resonate with the Department of Ed. So we submitted the waiver, and I received a call from Rob Curtin, the Associate Commissioner, who asked some follow-up questions. I will tell you that, I don't want to divulge any private information, but he said there were no waivers approved that pushed the start date out to April 26th. That's what he told me when he denied the waiver. So he said that's an impossible date. Now that was when I spoke to him last week, so I don't know if something has changed, but that was a critical concern that he expressed to me. So I'm sharing that out with you for your feedback.
Laurie.
I think that statement in itself is a reason to reapply, because that was not factual with the data that came out today. In addition, Commissioner Riley, I will quote him, said, based on the information provided, your request has been denied. And the community and this committee feels that they did not get the information they needed. So I would like to move that we ask for, I don't know what you would call it, another request,
an appeal,
an appeal, thank you. It's been a very long day. An appeal to reevaluate the waiver because the information was not presented that the community had stated in the survey. And I truly believe, and it may seem very sinister, but I have worked with DESE for many years. And I really feel that they told you things so they would be able to deny it very easily. And you have to push for what we want as a community, and not submit something that they'd like to be able to deny.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate the article that was in today's Mass Live, we've already Lori's already mentioned it and mentioned some of the numbers here. It does say that 32 of the requests that were approved were to return incrementally because the districts have been fully remote for the entire year. These districts will return hybrid mode by April 8th, and then fully in mode by either the 12th, 26th, or no later than May 3rd. So there's been quite a number of, I guess I'm not clear on what you just mentioned, LeClaire, because it certainly sounds like, at least based on this article, that there have been approved applications, waivers, seeking just to delay the start of full in-person. And, we are not in any kind of in-person full day. I mean, we have just started hybrid models half days. So the jump to full in-person, full days is a pretty big leap from where we are at as a school district. And I think that that's one of the critical things that, I certainly would be clarifying here a little bit more strongly in the way that you wrote this letter. We are in a hybrid moding, week on, week off. I don't think, unless I'm not missing it, I don't even see that you mentioning that it's a half day. I would be mentioning that right there, that our hybrid model right now is half day, week in, week off. And so to jump to full hybrid days, let alone to 100% in person, is a big leap. And one of the big operational hurdles that I also don't see you mentioning here is that we have not done a single lunch. We have not done a single lunch with any of our students for the entire year, right? In school. And so that is another operational hurdle that we are looking to have a few extra weeks to get through. And that's one thing that I would emphasize here. I also think, I assume that one of the reasons why you did not mention it in the waiver is probably because, based on DESE's not wanting to really talk about or care about, teachers testing. And so that's not really an emphasis here. It's certainly one of our emphases as a school committee, but I think that I could understand why it's not mentioned in this waiver. But I think it is one of the big pieces. We want to make sure that our teachers are, have been vaccinated, and that they have been enough time after vaccination to have the full efficiency of that vaccination. And so whether or not that's included in this letter or not, I leave that open-ended, but I think that that's certainly, from our perspective, a pretty critical piece here. I'll stop talking. Go ahead, Lori.
Thank you, Maren. You've said so much what I'm feeling and what I believe, but also we have to think about the equity issue. We have to think about the families that do not feel safe to send their children into full buildings right now. We've also heard from parents of special education students. It seems that we don't have a very solid plan right now to provide services in a safe way. That should all be included in this appeal to DESE.
Well, I would actually like to ask Dr. LeClaire to speak to that point, because I'm a little concerned that hearing that we're talking about doing special education, IEP services in the middle of the classroom via, remote. So, I mean, is that true, or what is the situation with that? So if you could please clarify, because that is definitely a concern. And so I'd love for you to clarify for everybody.
Maren, if I could just jump in real quick, because it sounds like we're about to move on to a new topic. And I just wanted to say one more thing about the waiver request. I just wanted to also express my concern, not only, as my colleagues have suggested here, that the letter didn't really express the will or the instruction of the committee, but I'm also really, I have a lot of sympathy now for families who have been told that we didn't get the waiver, we're going to be returning full time on April 5th, and now we're going to appeal and wait for an appeal and perhaps still return on April 5th, or perhaps our appeal will be successful and then we will be looking at another much later date. And so, I think that the inability for families to make plans around childcare and to set expectations for their children is just another level of frustration that I'm feeling around this process. And so I just want to mention that, because I think, I think families are feeling like it's really hard to anticipate anything, and this process is adding to that frustration. So I just wanted to mention that, and then, but I will move us on to this next topic around special education.
I have one point that I'd just like to throw in about the waiver before we move on as well, if that's what we're doing, and that's specifically related to the presentation of data. Obviously, a lot of parents find that their survey results weren't really presented in the way that they hoped or wanted them to be. And I feel like if I was on the receiving end of the waiver and I saw that 80% of parents in a community were interested in sending their children back, that was the thing that stood out to me from the waiver application as, the thing that very well might have stood in our way. And I saw in their denial, I trust you'll figure out the necessary steps to appeal. There is a place to contact them for further conversations, and I would strongly implore you to clarify the data that was presented and make it clear that 80% are not just full bore looking to move ahead and have a great deal of reservations for all of the reasons that my colleagues have presented.
Yeah, I mean, just before we move off this conversation, Marissa, I just wondered, I would certainly like to see that an appeal is put in by tomorrow. Speaking to Marissa's point that we need fast action on this, it just closed Monday, right? So yesterday was the last day. If we get an appeal in there by tomorrow, and then hopefully, we would know as quickly as possible back from them whether or not that appeal is going to be reviewed or possible. And then if we're looking to get together as a school committee by next Tuesday as a possibility, then we would be able to report back on that, or at least if we didn't know before, then we should hopefully know more later than that.
And what are appropriate forms of communication to the school community at this point? Because I know families who have got the information full time April 5th, and they've started to make changes in the structure of their child care. And so if they have told whoever is caring for their children while they're at work, oh, I won't need your services on April 5th, they deserve to know that we've opened the possibility back up that we might still be in half-day hybrid beyond this April 5th date. There's just not that much time, and I'm worried about families that are going to be left in a lurch as we're kind of destabilizing this process once again. I don't know how you communicate the wait, maybe, but that's the reality of the scenario right now.
I can send something out to elementary school parents tomorrow, Marissa, first thing.
Okay, thank you.
To let them know that there's an appeal that will be in process. So they can put the brakes on whatever they're moving forward with.
Yeah, Laurie.
Would it be possible, Dr. Leclaire, before you send it to DESE, to send it to a few of the school committee members without it being a quorum?
Absolutely. I'll send it to all of you, and then you can respond to me individually, which is what you have to do.
Okay, thank you.
I'll do that.
And then and do you think that everyone could get responses to you, and then we could still submit it tomorrow?
Well, if you want it submitted tomorrow, I'll have to do it by the end of the business day, whether I hear from people or not. So just, I don't want to be holding out waiting for someone on the school committee to get back to me and miss the cutoff time. So does that sound fair?
Somebody's going to have to communicate all of this to Cindy.
I'll do it.
Yeah, I think if it would be reasonable if you got it out to us by, just put a time to it, say 10 a.m. if that works, and then we got responses back to you by 2 p.m. And then you were able to send it by the end of the business day to DESE. It's tight and it's not going to be able to get to everybody, but at least those of us who feel like we want to make a prioritization of it, then we can make sure that we fit into that window.
Yes, Laurie, please.
Can we also move that no matter what happens with DESE, that if we are not granted the waiver, or if we are granted the waiver, yes, it would be if we are granted the waiver. If we are granted the waiver, could we move to a full day hybrid and do what we wanted? And that could be in this appeal, Dr. Leclerc, to say we would like to move in a positive direction by trying to work on lunches and do it with half of the population or fewer students, because we know that some are remaining remote. But I think that would be an impetus to them saying yes, because they see that we're going from half to full. And that would be good for the parents that also have such struggles.
I really like that, Laurie. I think that it provides grounds for why we're appealing, as opposed to just like, we're trying again with the same argument. But, yeah.
Agreed. And I'm very much in favor of that incremental approach. So thank you for bringing that up. I meant to come back to that suggestion that I think we received earlier.
So what we're looking to do then is what you guys are suggesting is that on April 5th, we would move to a full day for K through 4, or full day for everybody, or what exactly are you asking for? I mean, right now we're in hybrid half days for all students, right?
Maybe DESE would be more willing to say yes if we move to a full day hybrid for everyone. If they see that we really are trying to get our students back in the building more.
I mean, what that gives us then is, yeah, it gives us that we would all be doing lunch, but we would still be we'd be able to still maintain our same spacing right now until we'd get 2 more weeks. Basically, each cohort would get 1 week of full-time lunch practice before then we brought in and doubled those numbers potentially with participation after the vacation.
And Dr. Leclerc, if you can also mention that we want to use tents for eating outside. And we did talk about that the April 5th, the weather can still be very bad. And I want the community to hear again that we are only talking about 10 class days. So many people are so upset that we want to extend this, but it's 10 days to do this more safely and more logically, and also have the chance to have students be eating outside so it's safer after the April vacation. So that should be included as well, our logistics, especially in our old elementary schools, for spacing students appropriately for lunch.
Wait, but if you're just suggesting that we go to lunch on April 5th, if we go to full days, we're doing lunch on April 5th. So that's, unless I heard
there are fewer students, to deal with it for the spacing. That's the whole point.
Okay.
So when we have them all back in and we need to space out, and if we can't be using the tents, and it's more dangerous at the beginning of the month.
I mean, I wonder, we had to do a vote to request a waiver. I don't know if we need to do a vote to require an appeal to our denial, and if we need to, in that, put exact language of what we're asking Dr. Leclerc to specify in that letter.
I think it's a good idea, because we've talked about a lot of stuff right in the last half hour. And if you had asked me to vote 5 minutes ago, I would have said no. So make a motion. Come on, Maren.
Jonathan, you want to do it or you want to do it?
Go for it, and I'll think about the things that you forget.
Thank you. I will definitely be accepting amendments to this proposal. But so I put forward that we are requesting Dr. Leclerc to do an appeal based on the denial of our waiver. That appeal will include items such as, well,
Current half-day status.
yeah, but I guess before I actually, okay, maybe step back for a second, because are we overall in agreement that we want to go to full day on April 5th, but doing it in
Hybrid.
cohorts? Yeah,
Yes.
hybrids. Okay. Okay, thank you. Then I'll restart this motion then. I just wasn't sure if we were all in agreement on that. So, okay, so I would like to make a motion that we appeal, have Dr. Leclerc appeal our denial of our waiver based on that we want to do an incremental step on April 5th for our schools, for all, pre-K through 12 schools to go to a hybrid.
K through 4.
Oh, I thought we wanted all students.
You want your middle and high school to
Well, middle and high
go-
school is already
Okay.
there.
But I don't think that doesn't need to be part of a waiver for the K.
But we wanted to add that to show that we're actually we're trying really hard to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And-
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, what we had originally proposed was that K through 12 was going to be full in school, full days on April 26th, right? So, I mean, I guess that doesn't have, and certainly you're right, it does not have to, this waiver is only pertaining to K through 4. And so we only have to address that, but I think we need to decide as a school district whether or not we're going to be having full days for the other grades as well. So
I think it's important to get to work on the process, for those 2 weeks before vacation, before we say, okay, now everybody come back.
Absolutely.
At all levels.
I agree, and articulated the right way, it shows, Commissioner Riley, that we are trying, we are bending over backwards. We are offering more than we have to get more students back in for more hours, but they have to meet us halfway. Come on now.
It's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
okay, but that is moving up from what we had agreed to previously. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around that piece. That's suddenly pushing our middle school and our high school to be full days starting on the 5th, which is in a week and whatever it is, 10 days from now.
I think it makes a lot of sense though on the same logic that we should be practicing those procedures at a reduced capacity before, at all levels before the full return at the end of April.
Uh-oh, Susan.
Can you please just restart your motion?
Yeah, no, don't worry. You can scrap everything that's already been said. The motion will be restarted for sure. This is trying to clarify what's going to go into that motion. So
Before we restart the motion, if I may, just another thought that occurs to me is, let's say our appeal is denied. The elementary students start full-time on April 5th. The option would still be there for us to consider full-day hybrid for the rest of the students to help prepare them for the end of the month. And it kind of seems like we're moving in the direction of that.
Yes, Dr. Leclerc.
I was just going to say, one way to think of it is if you are, don't think of the appeal right now. If you are saying as a school committee that you want to take a vote as of April 5th, all students in grades K through 12 will be expected to be at a minimum, a full day hybrid model, 1 week on, 1 week off, then I think that's a vote you can take. And then you can move to the appeal letter. That's just a suggestion. Because the middle school and high school don't really need to be decided in the motion about the appeal letter.
Right. Yes, I agree. I think that I mean, I see both sides, right? So some committee members are saying that we want to include it, that we're requiring the whole district to move towards full days as showing our process steps to get us to full day
Right.
every day.
But we can articulate that the school committee took a vote on date to move to a full day hybrid model beginning April 5th for grades K through 12. We can include that in an appeal.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I thought it would make it cleaner for you, but
We can't include K through 4 in that motion though, because as far as Dusty's concerned, we have to put K through 4 in on April 5th. So it would be a motion for 5 through 12 to start full day hybrid on the 5th. And then go back to the appeal.
Now 2 weeks before they're expected to, this is 2 weeks before. So it's just, I think we can do it. I think the administrators can do it. It's just elongating the day. But we've only been talking as a district K4 for April 5th.
Right. I mean, that I guess that's my concern, right? So there's two pieces to this. One is we're trying to delay the full day in-person K through 4, which the state is requiring us for 2 weeks, right? And that's why we're putting in an appeal to push back on that requirement 2 weeks earlier than what we want. 3 weeks, but one's a vacation week. So 2 school weeks earlier. But now through this conversation, we're now suddenly upping the ante for our 5 through 12 and saying they're going to start full days on the 5th when that was never part of a previous conversation. And I feel like, that's, 8 business days of schools to suddenly increase that request to both Dr. Leclerc, her administration, students, parents, all of that. I feel like that's a little, in our reaction to try to appeal the waiver or denial, I feel like we're now maybe rushing that piece of it a little too much.
I hear that, but so currently 5 through 12 will return to full time on the 26th.
Which is 2 days earlier than the Department of Ed.
Okay, but I guess that I'm following the logic of our appeal here, that the reason why we want these extra 2 weeks is a chance to practice these procedures at reduced capacity. And so it seems to me that while it requires some rapid movement right now, it gives the district that benefit of getting to practice lunch for middle school and lunch for high school before they're back in full capacity. So I don't know if operationally, if that's worth it to you, Dr. Leclerc, to go through the challenge of kind of rapidly moving to full time. But
I think we can do it. I'm just apprehensive about a shift for families, that have gotten acclimated to the half day model and believe they're switching on the 26th. But I believe we can do it. It's only half of our students in the building at a time. Theoretically, I know people are nervous about lunch, but I will say, as educators, we know how to do lunch. Yes, this will look different, but we are bringing the additional staff on. We're bringing the lunch monitors back. We've ordered We've already ordered the supplies like K-12 that we need to do the lunches. We've already had those conversations with the administrators. You know, we haven't alerted the bus garage if that's, you know, but it'll probably be the same routes just later in the day. So that will be a shift for the bus company. So we'll have to get them on board right away. But yeah, you know, and so I think we can make it work. I think one other obstacle I can think of at the middle school is currently specials are remote only. And so they'll be, if we're having everyone back, then they'll be doing specials as of April 5th in person. And they were probably planning on the 26th. So that may impact some of our educators. So those are just, you know, they're nuances that I think we can overcome. Not everyone will be happy, but I think we can do it.
And I mean, parents still have the option to keep them home. You know, if they're not ready to make the transition, we're not forcing everyone to do it for the next 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Starting April 5th.
Well, but they may have already, I don't remember what our current policy is, but I mean, they're supposed to have a certain amount of time between jumping between remote and in person. And
it's 2 weeks.
Right. And right. So if they're right now in person, in hybrid mode, half days, and then suddenly we're going to make it jump to a full day lunch in person hybrid cohorts, and then we're going to full days. I don't know.
I thought it was only one directionally, that you needed to give the district advance warning if you were going to move from remote to in person. But you can drop to remote at any point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So if the sudden move to full time, or a full day rather, was an issue for that family, they could ostensibly keep their child home for that week.
And I'm going to tell you that more often than not, it's not going to be an issue.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think there's a lot of families that want a full day option.
They need a full day option.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think more parents would be happier to have the full day option in 2 weeks than staying at the half day option, because we've heard it's such a hardship, especially middle schoolers aren't driving yet. Parents are working, and this really would be practice for getting everyone in. I know our staff is capable and everyone's working so hard to be ready for when they have to go full time, everybody, but it really would be a step and a safe step. And I think Desi would appreciate that step.
Am I allowed to make a motion?
Of course.
Is it just like
no, she's the chair
that the chair
today.
never makes a motion? No, mayor's saying no.
Technically, the chair wouldn't make a motion. I
Okay,
believe.
then I won't. I'll wait for you all.
Well, it seems like we already, I mean, we know what the motions are. I mean, we just don't know how exactly the votes will come out. So I guess it seems like we should go forward with the way Dr. Leclerc was recommending, that we split these into 2 different motions. Does that seem like that's a good place to go?
Mm-hmm.
So then I would make a motion that we move our 5 through 12 grades students back to hybrid full day starting April 5th.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? So then we'll vote. Mayor LaChapelle?
Aye.
Maren?
Aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
And Marissa Query, aye. Vote passes.
Okay, so then I'd make a second motion that we are seeking an appeal from Dr. Leclerc to Wright Desi for the denial of our waiver request. And that we are seeking for April 5th to be used as a date to move our K through 4 students to hybrid full day in order to operationally focus on full day requirements, including lunch, while we have smaller population. And that then we would move to full day, full population starting April 26th as we originally requested.
I'll second that motion.
Did we want to add anything to the motion about specific items we wanted included in the waiver, or is that more than needs to go into the vote?
Dr. Claire, do you feel like you need more clarity? I mean, we're gonna have a chance to review it tomorrow, but I feel like a lot of that's been said. I don't know if you want to I
think I wrote down everything that we discussed, so and I'll share it out with you and you can pick it apart and see what's missing.
Do we have any
timeline that I roughly threw out there? As that seemed appropriate as well, and for everybody as well?
Any further discussion? All right, then we'll move to vote. Mayor LaChapelle.
Aye.
Maren.
Aye.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie.
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
And Marissa Carreri, aye.
Sue, are you good?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay.
Did we want to move on to discussion about, Maren had raised a question about special education services?
I would appreciate a report back on that to clarify that for us as well as for the public.
Sure, I have, so I will tell you anecdotally what I saw when I was walking around the schools the other day, but I have Sarah Mochak's on the call if you have specific questions. But I was in one of the elementary schools the other day, and in this elementary school, we have the old coat closets that are enormous. So we have emptied those out, and there's a desk in there for a paraeducator, and there are 1 or 2 student desks in there. So if we need to pull a student out of the classroom space, they can go right into that space to do work on a laptop or with an adult. Another example I saw was in some of the classrooms, they had the like fabric dividers that were separated out, and students could go back. There's a desk back there, and students could go back and use the headsets with the microphones, the noise canceling headsets with the microphones, and Zoom into a session with a teacher in another space. We also, you know, I heard someone say, where's the plexiglass? If you walk around our schools, you'll see tons of plexiglass. I was in a school the other day, and there were tables out in the hallways, in the special education classrooms that are set up with the plexiglass barriers. They're all there. So all of that is visually what I saw walking around the buildings. And I know that people are not welcome in our buildings right now. So I'm just trying to give you actual examples of what I visually noted the other day. But Sarah is on the call if you have a specific question around a level or a type of service. I think Sarah's here. And we'll also, I should say that, you know, we'll have that parent forum on Monday night, and that will be for general ed and special ed. Of course, we won't answer parents' specific questions about their individual child, but Sarah will answer general special ed questions that night and can, set up a time to reach out to families with individual questions. But is it all right if I call on Sarah?
Certainly.
Okay. And Maren, did you have a specific concern or question? Or do you just want Sarah to give you a general overview?
The general overview would be great. I think also it might be helpful. Like you're saying, parents are not allowed into schools right now. Maybe a social media post could be doing some photographs of what the settings is like so that people can see what settings are. Obviously, we can't take pictures of the children, but if you take pictures from behind them so that you don't know who it actually is, then that sort of is a way to demonstrate how it's being used, or just, I don't know, you guys can figure that out, but a social media posting of that sort might be really helpful to show documentation to people and to improve their feelings about safety, about what we're doing for our protocols.
And so am I understanding that the other concern was that services were being provided over Zoom as opposed to in person? And can you talk through the rationale of that? Is it that we don't want special education teachers crossing different cohorts because they would be seeing students in different groups? I don't know if I'm formulating my question properly at this point in the night.
Well, I can speak. I don't know if Sarah wants to address this. I can tell you from, say, a Title I point of view. We might take students in a small reading group that might be one child from this class, one child from this class, one child from this class. We may have another child that's fully remote. So how do you manage those students without cross-contamination, with addressing all learners equitably? So Zoom is an opportunity to do that. So that might be a way that we do a Title I instruction. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to talk about special ed at all.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that having been in with our special populations since right after break has given us some opportunity to figure out different ways to provide service. I probably don't need to remind the committee, but for those of you who are here also, one of the main tenets of special education is that it's individualized. I mean, in an IEP, that's the first word in an individual education program. So it's a little bit challenging to address specifics because there are so many ways we meet the needs of our learners. But I can tell you that at the middle school and the high school, most of the academic support services for students are delivered in a co-taught model. So that's already happening. What I think is one of the biggest barriers is just what Dr. LeClaire described, is how to meet the needs of the students with several barriers, and I'll tell you what those barriers are. At the elementary schools, we have one special education teacher at each school that does the academic support services. And that teacher services all 10 classrooms. So, and each teacher has about 25 students on their caseload. We are lucky to have some amazingly talented teachers in our district, but it does mean that they will have to pull students from different classrooms. This is always how we've done it. So if they're doing a reading group, they might have kids from both second grade classrooms. And we are hesitant to do that at the moment because then we're mixing cohorts. Then we're mixing students from different classrooms. So that's a barrier. Space is also a barrier, particularly at the elementary schools, where if we're going to pull a small group, we need to make sure we're keeping people at the proper distance from each other. I think our elementary principals have maximized and utilized every space in their schools. So space, staffing, staff, that teacher has to service so many students, but we are looking at each individual student and how best to meet their needs. And so we have begun to pull small groups of students. I had a conversation with Judy Averill about piloting, having her her special education teacher piloting taking students outside who might be from a couple of different classrooms. So we are moving ahead with offering lots of different ways to provide services, but it could be that the student needs to receive their services in the classroom. That I think is would be the least effective model, but it might be a reality. And when we have had to do that, teachers have put those students in a different you know, in a space where there's some more privacy. And yes, I think Maren, you said that, or maybe it was Marissa talked about that could be noisy, and that certainly could be noisy if the student is receiving reading instruction while the rest of the class is doing a different lesson. So not optimal at all. But we are working to address all of these barriers that we face because of the situation that we're in. Let me see. Did I have anything else? But I think and this is how it's, you know, how it's being done, you know, in other districts where they're working to figure it out. And there are lots of different ways of doing it. And we're always looking at what's the best way to deliver that service to that individual child. And I think that just because the letter was read out loud tonight, and because there in the special education section of that letter, it said that a reading teacher was no longer providing reading services. That was not a special education teacher, and it was under the special education heading, which is why I wanted to address it. And I believe that it has been resolved. So I just wanted to let you know that. I don't know if you have specific questions for me. Before you ask me any questions, if you have any, I feel confident in our team and under Dr. LeClaire's leadership that we will be able to continue to provide a robust and rigorous and individualized special education program to our students.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I really appreciate you talking about that. I certainly understand small groups is a really big challenge. I can, you know, and that you guys are continuing to try to adapt it and find ways to make it work, make it safe for students. I think that that's commendable and critical that we keep, you know, trying to fine tune and make it better and better to meet those services, and recognizing that it is mixing cohorts, and so how to do that safely. So thank you for working on that and continue to look to ways to improve it and keep it safe in our days of COVID. I think that, you know, one of the concerns was if there were students who were doing small groups or doing one-on-one, and if that was the example, I think that was within the letter, if I remember correctly, was that student actually just stayed at their regular seat in the middle of the classroom, and so it was clear that they were clear that they were in a different setting or a different sort of group than the rest of the class. And that obviously then calls attention to their individualized program. And not just that they're being pulled out for something, but that they're, those groups can be dealing with social skills or dealing with different lessons that are a part of students' IEPs. And there's a reason that those are pullouts and not done in front of everybody, as that is supposed to be providing safe and sort of emotionally safe settings for them to be developing those skills, right? And so that's why they're pulled out of the classroom and not, directly taught those skills in front of the entire class. So, obviously it's, I can totally imagine that it is extremely challenging to figure out how to do small groups and continue to work on those kind of settings with all the restrictions that we have right now. But I think that that's one of the concerns that was raised. And so understanding that you guys are continuing to look at ways to improve it and do it with, to meet those cross cohort kind of situations and staying safe, I think is just the request that would certainly be to continue to refine that and to make it work as best with the protection and privacy for our students in mind.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's, one of the things that we think about, all the time. And just one more little piece. So we have, immensely successful social, emotional, and behavioral support programs at all levels, but at the elementary level, there's just more students who have that support. And I know that they have, there's a teacher that runs that program, and then there are paraeducators that support the students in those classrooms. And they have made that so that one paraeducator might just, where they might have floated before amongst a bunch of classrooms, now they might be assigned to one or just assigned to 2 different classrooms. So some of these things have already been worked out and are working. And I'm happy to, answer individual parent questions. You can find my email or someone can direct you to me.
Sarah, I just wanted to ask real quick. Sorry, Lori, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to commend you on mentioning outside. So I think, but you didn't mention tents. Hopefully we are using tents now. They've all gone up. Dr. Leclaire, have they all gone up or no?
There's a tent. Some of the tents have gone up. Some of the tents are being repositioned, and some new tents are coming in. So
Okay,
all
great.
the tents will be ready on April 5th in the district.
Okay, wonderful. So Sarah, thank you for mentioning, something outside the box with outside services. And we'll be able to do that more with the good weather coming. Thank you.
I think unless it's raining, we're okay without a tent, so.
Mhm.
Oh, what I was gonna ask, sorry, was about remote learners. For parents that have chosen to keep their kids remote. How are their services being rendered, in that type of a situation?
I imagine that schedules might change, but we are required to provide all of the services in that IEP. So they will continue, for sure continue, but it may be that schedules would change. I have a week, I have a call with, or, a meeting with the Associate Commissioner for Special Education this Friday. I'm hoping that that's on the agenda, given that we're heading back to full in-person learning. So how to meet the needs of our students who are continuing to stay home. But certainly something that will be, we've already started thinking about and doing. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, I just want to give you guys a shout out. I think that there's one of the most challenging things is trying to be able to provide all these individualized support, and the work that you guys are doing is really critical. So thank you for continuing to do that as best as you can, and continue to fine tune it and improve it as we go for the rest of this year. So thank you very much, Sarah, for all your work.
You're welcome. As always, it's my pleasure to serve the families and students of Easthampton.
Are there any more questions on this topic? I think there was also a question raised about structure and expectation for students that remain in the fully remote model once we move to a full-time, full-person model.
Sure. So I think there was some confusion. So once we move to a full in-person model, we say goodbye to the hybrid model, which is the week on, week off. But we don't necessarily say goodbye to hybrid learning strategies or instructional strategies, but we do say goodbye to the hybrid model of 1 week on, 1 week off. So I think it is not a surprise to anyone, because I've said it a million times, and you have an educator on your committee. Remote learning is not as wonderful as in-person learning. In-person learning is the gold standard. Remote learning is not going to be equal. Just by its very nature, there are challenges associated with remote learning that are different from in-person instruction. So we have communicated to families that remote learning might look a little bit different once we return to full in-person learning. There will still be a Zoom link that remote families will have every day to live stream in. There will still be Google Classroom where their assignments will be held and where students will submit their work. So those things will still remain the same. But the students that are in the full in-person model, that are in the classrooms, we're not striving to have those students on technology 6.5 hours a day. So it will look different than it does for the remote students that are at home on technology. And there will be times when lessons are going on in the classroom and the students at home will have asynchronous lessons. But there will also be times when the link is open and the teacher is having a lesson with all the students in the classroom, whether they're in person or remote. So that's the message that we were trying to give to people. And I think, I talked to another superintendent today who said, and I think this is true, I told people this information because I want people to make an informed decision. And I think that's why we tried to be informative in the message that we put out to families. We said all along, and I've said it in multiple communications, but I know people are still asking, are we going to have a different teacher? And I said in the communication that went out in the last week or two, and to anyone that's communicated with me, we're keeping your same teacher. That's not true in every district. So there are challenges associated with that, but we are keeping your same classroom teacher. So even if you stay remote, you'll still have your same teacher, but it may look a little bit different.
I think parents are most concerned from the letters that we've received that there will be very little synchronous learning and mostly asynchronous, which is not what they're getting now. I would also like to say remote can be challenging for many students, but we have also heard, and from a teacher standpoint, it's also worked very well for many students. So parents are now feeling because they are at risk and they can't take a chance because they haven't been vaccinated yet. So they can't send their children back and they don't want to see the education of their children being more asynchronous than synchronous. However, from a teacher standpoint, I know how challenging it is. Many districts have reached out to educators and have asked who would like to be the teacher for cohort C. That also presents many challenges because then the parents that want to keep the same teacher can't keep the same teacher. So it's better for the teacher in the classroom that will have to manage, especially at the elementary level, a large number of children in front of them and then be checking in on the screen. Some parents have reached out to ask why we can't look for more educators to do just the cohort C. And I explained that it would be very challenging at this time of year to be able to find enough teachers in an equitable manner to be able to do this for all levels, especially in the elementary school where they need more support. But teachers also need time to adjust to this hybrid learning. And I would hope that as a district, we provide the time in professional development hours to be able to get them used to doing synchronous teaching with the students remote, with the students in front of them. So they don't have to just be giving assignments on Google Classroom and the students at home because they are at risk either for their personal health or their family's health, that they're not going to be getting the equitable education that they deserve. So we have to work with that, Dr. LeClaire.
Right, and I think we had a conversation today with the leadership team where they're going to be sending out a communication to the teachers to send home to students. I think some of the misinformation may have stemmed from teachers giving different teachers giving different responses. You have so many people that are providing information, because I never said in any of my communication to families that there would be more asynchronous than synchronous instruction. So I don't know where that piece of information came from, where that assumption stemmed from. But yeah, so I think it's important to correct the information. But I do think that you were on the right path. I think that at this juncture in time, heading into April, if we were to secure teachers for cohort C learners, I think more families would be upset to be pulled away from the teacher that they've had all year long. I think it might be a different discussion if it was last September, but what I have heard from families is, above all else, if they remain remote, they want to keep their same teacher. So that's really what we're trying very hard to do. But it will be an adjustment for teachers. And so I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for families that have children that will be staying at home. I realize that if you're choosing to stay home, there's a very good reason that you're making that choice. But I hope that people have support for our educators as they transition to this model where the hybrid students will kind of go away, and it will be just the full in-person students and then just the remote only students. It will be a difference for our teachers, and they're going to need a little bit of grace and support around that.
I just want to, I'm sure we'll hear from people about this, but there was a message that went out to families that said, it says remote students may have more asynchronous lessons.
They may have more. I didn't say more than, but I said they may have more than they currently have now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's kind of the nature of the concern, because a lot of remote students have gotten used to having that, direct attention from the teacher. It's hard for me to quite imagine how a teacher would manage without essentially asking them to perform two very different jobs at the same time. I think there's a workload issue here.
Yes.
But I'm trying to understand, so currently in the hybrid model, effectively students are zooming into their classrooms from the building, right? And then they're zooming in from home. And so the goal for when we move to full-time instruction is to kind of get students off those computers. Is the other option here that we just keep students in the building on their computers, so that way what students at home are experiencing is essentially the same as what students in school are experiencing.
Well,
I'm trying to think, what is the equitable option here?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of families, I think what we have already been doing is getting the students in the buildings off of computers as much as possible. Because keep in mind, again, not that you've seen our classrooms, but there's large screens in front. So the students sitting at their desks can see their peers on the screen, the large screen at the front of the room. They don't need to be on their laptop to see their Zoom classmates. They can just see them in the room. It's like they're sitting, in a different spot. So we've really tried not to have students on computers as much as possible. The teachers are really trying to do more hands-on things, more paper and pencil things, kind of going back more old school, because we know that the time on devices is a concern that families have expressed to us. So we're really trying to have that human contact. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the feeling that I get from having conversations with the administrators is that the teachers want to do more of that when they have predominantly in-person students. And, I want to be clear that in most of our classes, I would say, I saw the list for Center Pepin yesterday. We might have 1 or 2 students that will be remote, maybe 3 in some classes. The majority of students will be in person. So we really want to try and get them off devices. But the students that are remote will just be on the screen. They'll be part of the class. So, they'll be engaged with their classmates in that model. But there may be times when the students in class are doing something on paper and the students that are learning remote are doing something in Google Classroom, because that's where their paper assignment is, if you will.
Shannon, sorry, I keep.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to comment on that. We did have a conversation, I believe, at our last school committee meeting, and it did seem like there was going to be less learning on the computer. I'm assuming that the curriculum is what people might have construed that as. You're talking about, the students not being on their computers during class because they can see them up front. I mean, are you dropping a lot of the computer curriculum? Is that what's happening?
Some of the computer curriculum may be dropped, but I will say that my understanding is that we have taken a lot of the resources that we have and digitized them in Google Classroom.
Okay.
So they will still exist digitally in Google Classroom, but the students will have the students that are in person will actually have the book in front of them, the worksheet in front of them, an actual paper document.
But they're actually doing the same things at the same time.
Correct.
Okay. And I don't think that was clear the last time we talked. You know what I mean? I think it sounded like that we were trying to do away with the computers in the classroom as far as the learning side of it. But I think that was the confusion.
Okay.
I might be wrong, but
that's a good point. Yep.
If I'm
Hopefully
confused,
that cleared it up,
other
Sharon,
people
so
are too.
thank you.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
If I may ask a point of clarification, and it may be, just based off of your description, Dr. Leclerc, it sounds like, the students who are remote are on the screen up front and their peers can see them. I imagine that the students who are remote are primarily seeing the teacher who is doing the instruction. And I wonder, can you just clarify if there is something in place that also, allows them to see their peers the way that their peers are seeing them, or
They can see the room. They can see the room that's in front of them. With the exception of, so we have document cameras, so they can be flipped out so that you can see the room, or the teacher, if she's using a document, might flip it down at certain points just so you could see the paper. All the kids can see the paper. But yes, we actually did a meeting today with a document camera in our main school committee meeting room area. We did a hybrid leadership team meeting today, and we used a document camera facing us as the people sitting at the table. And then we projected that onto the screen, and we were watching all the other members Zoom. And we were sitting at a table together because the people at the table, there were 3 of us, we were all fully vaccinated, so we could sit at a table together. So we were modeling hybrid meetings, but we used a document camera.
Jonathan, there are some teachers in classrooms right now who are actually using 3 different computers and a document camera at the same time in order to be doing this.
Yes, they have multiple screens.
Yes, and please, people, just realize what educators have to go through to be able to readapt their teaching to the virtual world and kids in front of them.
Thank you for that point and for your clarification, Dr. Leclerc. In my mind, I assumed that there was multiple cameras going on, and I'm sympathetic of the challenge there, and I appreciate that's accounted for.
It's funny because you know, it just is an example of the new normal. I've been in classrooms, I've been by classrooms, and I have not seen just one computer on anyone's desk. And it doesn't even occur to me to bring that up to you because everybody now has multiple screens.
I think a lot of us have learned the beauty of multiple monitors
Yeah.
throughout this whole process.
Do you have any further discussion or questions on this topic?
I have something for other. Are you still on other?
I think we're still on other.
Just a point of clarification, and I'm not sure Sue Colby will tell me, I think we might need a vote. At the beginning of I forgot to do this, but at the beginning of the school year, when we did 10 days of professional development and we started the school year 10 days later, we shifted our grades when grades closed. And as a result of that, at the elementary and middle level, we shifted parent-teacher conference dates because we wanted them to align with the end of term dates so that the teachers would have something to talk to parents about. The high school didn't want to do that because they have that semester changeover day in January and they wanted to keep it. So we did adjust parent-teacher conference days. And I think we should have brought that to you for a vote on the as a calendar change. So we did not, so I apologize. I take ownership of that. Families know what the change is. It's been in the newsletters and everything, but that's the rationale as to why we did it. So I confess.
And you're seeking a vote now, I take it?
I think Sue wanted a vote just because then she can officially update the calendar on the school district website. Am I correct, Sue?
Yes, please.
So I would like to make a motion that we approve parent-teacher conferences. It looks like at Whitebrook, Center Pepin, Maple for April 15th and 16th. Is that what I'm reading correctly?
Yes.
It's just the changes to the calendar.
Yeah,
I
you can
second
just,
that.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I think you can just make a motion for the general changes in the calendar related to the delayed school start.
Did I hear a second? Sorry.
I seconded.
You did.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so any more discussion?
And I guess the amendment then would be that would also be to recognize that on March 18th and 19th, those parent-teacher conferences were only for the high school.
All right. So we're ready to vote. Mayor?
Aye.
Maren?
Aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
And Marissa Crary, aye. Motion passes.
Thank
I think
you.
that brings us to the superintendent's report.
Yes, and the only one that's still left on there is the MIAA athletic eligibility discussion. Principal Evans and our athletic director, Brian Miller, wanted to bring this issue to your attention in this request. They're seeking to allow the adoption of the MIAA athletic academic requirements for the remainder of this calendar year, this school year, for the fall 2 and the spring sports seasons. I believe they shared a document with you the other day. Mr. Evans is here. I don't know if you'd like him to speak on this or if you'd like to just jump directly to questions. Do you have a preference, Marissa?
I don't have a preference, but I would defer to anyone in the committee who has. Yes.
Is it all right if he gives a little description?
That'd be great.
Okay, all right, Mr. Evans, thank you.
Good evening, folks, and thanks for giving me some time here. So as I explained in the letter, when we shifted our grading policy at the end of the first semester, excuse me, the fall semester, it was in January, we allowed for students that had a failing first and second quarter average, if they passed the final assessment, they would be able to pass the course. We had that discussion here, and that worked out well for many of our students. In the process of making that adjustment, we never addressed how that might affect our student athletes and extracurricular activity students, and in regards to eligibility. And in not addressing that, I think it left some things open to interpretation for some of our students. And there was the sort of the sense that the quarter grade now didn't matter. It was all about the final assessment, which is a crude interpretation of it, but it was somewhat accurate as well. So in our policy, our athletic and extracurricular eligibility policy requires students to pass every class in the second quarter and also have a passing grade for the final grade of the semester. All 8 of those grades need to be passing in order for a student to remain eligible. It's basically as strict as it could possibly be. And that's worked well for us. I think it's served the district well over the years. The MIAA policy is quite different. For a block schedule, it requires students to pass 2 major classes out of 4 in the second quarter. It does not calculate end of semester grades. So in our current policy, a number of students who thought that they were putting their efforts in the right place became ineligible, even though many of them passed the semester classes. So we felt like not addressing that issue was a disservice to those students. I think it created a confusing playing field, pardon the expression, and left things open to interpretation. And so I feel like as the administrator, it's my obligation to correct that. By adjusting to the MIAA standards, we're basically taking a known standard and putting it in place, one that it's not open for interpretation about why we would do it one way or another, whether it would eliminate some students versus others. And if we just adopt the MIAA standards, again, for just the remainder of this school year, which would be in terms of the athletic seasons, the fall 2 season that we're currently in, and the spring season, which we hope to begin soon. So that's the request that we're making there. Lori?
Principal Evans, I thank you. You know that I'm not one that's been fully supportive of MIAA this year, but I appreciate how you have looked at this. And as a high school teacher who knows the importance to her students of athletics and the misinterpretation, I fully support what you have proposed to us. So thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Sure.
So if I'm understanding correctly, there are some students who interpreted it and in a way where they shifted their focus to the final assessment and shifted their focus away from worrying about the grade for the quarter. Is that true?
That's sort of my broad interpretation of what I think happened in some cases. In at least one case, a student made that clear to me. But I haven't asked all the students that were engaged in that. I just recognized that there was some ambiguity that I left open there.
Right. So the reason I ask is, I certainly appreciate the simplicity of shifting to an existing standard from the state. I also wonder why we might do that in place of, say, amending our policy in this moment to reflect, if they did indeed, like, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking, it's important that they passed the final assessment because that's what they were shifting their focus to. And I would agree that the quarter grade shouldn't inhibit any participation. And I guess I'm just curious, why you might go this route instead of the other route of saying, we're just going to look at that assessment grade like we did for the class as a whole.
So I appreciate that question, Jonathan. And part of my answer is that I know the data. I know which students are affected. And by sort of trying to slice it in a finer way, I know exactly who's being affected and who's not. And I feel like it's a more just and sort of transparent to just use the existing MIAA. And I will tell you that in making that adjustment, there are still students who will not be eligible. So it's a way for, I think, for me to put a proposal to you that blinds all of us to who's affecting and who's not. We're just using a standard that we know exists.
I guess, Principal Evans, I guess the piece that I'm confused by, and I understand the piece that grade percentages were adjusted this year, but the policy about participating in sports was set, right? I mean, that was clear. It's our same policy that we've had up to this point.
I think that, Marin, I think that that when we made changes, by not being explicit that nothing changed in terms of eligibility, that left that open to some level of interpretation and ambiguity.
I guess because my reflection here is that if we're now suddenly changing our eligibility criteria entirely to a different model completely for the remainder of the year, that's even more switching it for students than.
Right, but it's switching it in a way that is, I think, not, it's switching it in a way that's more favorable to understanding the impact of remote learning. It's switching it in a way that is, I think, more compassionate, I think, for the situation. It's not changing the playing field in a way that suddenly is going to affect somebody to say, wait a minute, I didn't know that. Instead, it's like, I don't think that it's not the same sort of pulling out the rug.
And basically, the change in policy will allow some people to be eligible that under our schools policy would not be, but it's not going to allow everybody that have had grade changes, because there still will be some students that would be ineligible even by MIAA eligibility criteria.
Everything you said is correct, yes.
And because of misinterpretation by a few, even if it's just a couple, I just want to take into account the social emotional well-being of students, and if this participation is going to help them get through the rest of this year. We've been so careful with our athletes and with the testing. Once again, I'd like to say I support it. And I've seen how the interaction with students who are failing, if they have a coach that checks in with the teachers weekly, I have seen grades go up in an amazing way. So Principal Evans, if you could continue to support that academics is always our main goal, with supportive athletics and the coaches, if they are working with students, it's so helpful for them.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Lori. I also appreciate, I think, something that I hadn't really put into the letter, which is that just the question of whether athletics was going to happen was, in the minds of everybody. Like, for a long time, we didn't know if there was going to be a season. So the incentive to maintain grades, I think, was really for a lot of students it wasn't the same, and the oversight, right? So when a coach knows and has access to student grades and can do that kind of support, it really does make a difference. Like I said, the policy that we have has served us well, and I believe that you know, it's appropriate to go back to our standard policy in the coming year. And by the way, that would, our next year's fall season would be impacted by grades at the end of this year, but because we're coming back in full, you know, and that almost all our students will be back in the building, and because we have time to be really explicit about what the expectation for the fall season is, I feel like it's appropriate to reinstate the Easthampton policy that we've been using at the beginning of the next season, of the fall season.
Can I make a motion? So I would like to move that we support, and I'm not as good at this as Maren and Jonathan, by the way, but I would like to make a motion that we support the changes to reflect the MIAA standards for grades in order to be participating in sports just until the remainder of this year.
A second.
We have a motion, a second. Any more discussion? We'll move to vote. Mayor? I think that was an aye, but I think I need you to unmute.
Mayor LaChapelle, aye. Sorry about that.
Maren?
Aaron Goldstein, no.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, no.
Laurie?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Marissa Crary, aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is waiver update. I assume we've covered that, unless there's
Yes.
anything else. You don't want to return to that conversation?
No.
So we have matters for action. Typically I make the motions on these, but since I'm acting as chair, would someone else be willing to make the motion?
Marissa, I think it is okay to make the motion. I've read Robert's rules carefully, but if Jonathan wants to do it, go ahead, Jonathan.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the school payroll dated March 11th, 2021 in the amount of $534,051.58.
I second that.
Mayor?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye. Sorry.
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Marissa Crary, aye.
I'd like to make a motion we approve the accounts payable authorization for payment dated March 11th, 2021 in the amount of $321,504.34.
I second that.
Mayor?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Marissa Crary, aye.
And is it just me or we already voted on C?
Yeah, I think we already
No, C
covered
is
the calendar.
different.
This is a different calendar thing.
Oh, is it?
This is next.
This is next year's.
Yeah.
And I just, if I could just talk about it for a few minutes.
Wait, just to clarify, it says 2021. That would be the current calendar.
Oh, Sue, is that
There's
this
another
calendar?
one.
That is a typo. I'm sorry. I just saw that when I looked down at it. It's supposed to be next year's.
Okay.
It means
So
21,
2020, 21, 22.
Yes.
Right.
And I just, it's a lot of the same that you're used to approving every year. However, I do want to point out just a couple of things. Normally we start the year with more professional days up front, like usually 2 or 3. We have 1 this year because we made a conscious decision to shift some of those PD days to January. And the reason was that we anticipate moving into the new building after the January break, after the Christmas break. So families would get a longer Christmas break and teachers would return to the new school and have a couple of days of professional development to get their new rooms set up, to learn how to use the technology in their rooms, to learn how to use the phone systems, how to get in and out of the building, just to get acclimated. And we know that that's not the entire school community, but I think it's important for us. The other levels of educators will have professional development on those January days as well. So that's one thing that looks different from the normal calendar you would see every year. The other one is the addition of the Juneteenth holiday, which next year falls on a Sunday. And we've just received an advisory that if the holiday falls on a Sunday, the Monday is the day that you have to close. Sue, did I get that right? Now I'm second guessing myself, and the mayor might be able to weigh in because I think it's municipal buildings have to close on the Monday after the Juneteenth holiday.
Yes,
Yes,
that's my understanding.
yes.
So I think Sue adjusted that in the calendar, which means that the last day would be not the 20th, but the 21st would be the half day.
That looks like it needs to actually still be corrected in
All right.
what I'm looking at here. It still
That's the
shows
one
it
I
being-
have too, Maren, and I thought maybe I just printed out the wrong one. So the
No, Sue
Juneteenth
resent it
holiday
on the
is new.
18th with the 21-22 typed correctly and the June 19th or the Juneteenth holiday in there.
Okay.
So we got one with our packet and then she sent another one.
It wasn't actually, yeah, she did. Yeah. And I printed out the wrong one in the packet. But those are the major changes that I wanted to point out to everyone. And I don't know if you have any questions.
I don't know if this really matters, but is there any way to shift things so that way we don't have our last day as a half day on a Tuesday?
We could, and we have had that conversation. One thing that we talked about, and I can't remember what it is now. We did talk about that, and so we can look at doing that if you think.
We're going to require you to give them at least one snow day next year.
Oh, there you go. That'll solve it.
Yes, that 21st, as Shannon is pointing out, is with no snow days. So there's a good chance
You
that we'll
owe
have snow days, and we'll go into that week anyhow.
I think I'm just nostalgic for the old days where like we would just try to craft the perfect last day of school. It's like now we live in a world where there's just no school. So yeah, I'm probably overthinking this. You're right. We're gonna have snow days. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, and it just, this is our first year with the Juneteenth holiday, like officially in the calendar. So
yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, we're trying to be cognizant of that.
I guess
I don't have the calendar in front of me. That screen died. I can't find the plug. Have we changed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day? Is that on that calendar? Okay.
Look right
Thank you.
now. Okay.
It is.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I thought we made that change.
You did. At
So
least
I
on the
can go back and look at this calendar again if you want me to look at that June 21st date.
No, I take that back.
Well, is there a reason that we're doing you're starting the school year on the 1st of September with a parent teacher day, so that school actually doesn't start till Thursday the 2nd. I guess that's the one question that I would have, but that because if
So
we
you're asking, could we do a teacher day on August 31st and then start students back on September 1st? And I think there was a contractual reason. Sue, can you weigh in on that?
I thought the contractual was that we had to give them Friday before Labor Day off, so they had to have that 4-day weekend, but I don't know anything about the 1st, about Tuesday.
The 31st, August 31st.
There is contractual language why we couldn't start it sooner.
So unless we get an agreement with the teachers union to do that, Maren, but I'm happy to explore that.
I just remembered it being a 4-day weekend that required the Friday before Labor Day off, but if there's something also that's affecting Tuesday, that's fine. I think that
What we can do,
adding-
Maren, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think adding the days to January, I certainly think that makes a lot of sense to allow for preparation back in the new school building, even though it does just affect 5 grades or 4 grades. It still, I think, is important for us to be fully prepared to be in that building and making that adjustment. So I certainly appreciate that switch.
What I can do is I bring this to you tonight as a point of information, and then we can vote on it next time, and I can look at if we can do anything with that start day, Maren, and pull that back and let you know next time.
I don't feel like it has to be reviewed. If other people feel like this is good and your review seemed like this is what you were wanting to propose.
Mm-hmm.
Fine with me.
But I
Marissa,
think you need to make a motion and vote on it then.
yeah, Marissa, I was just going to ask about that. So I'll make a motion to approve the 2021-2022 school calendar draft 2 as presented.
Draft 3.
Second.
No,
Draft
no, it's 3.
3? Oh,
3.
that was a change.
Yes.
Gotcha. Draft 3. My apologies.
Draft 3.
I
I'll second
second that. Oh, whoever.
further
Let's just
discussion?
finish.
All right, Mayor,
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Maren,
Maren Goldstein, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Marissa Carreri, aye. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Have we reached that part?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
I
I'll
will
second.
second that.
Okay, Mayor,
Mayor LaChapelle, aye. Thank
Maren
you all.
Goldstein, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Laurie Garcia, aye. Buenas noches.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Marissa Carreri, aye. Thank you all and good evening. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Marissa, you did a
Thank
great job. Thank you, Marissa. Wonderful. Bye, everyone.